Hello, we should be live now. I'm gonna quickly go onto YouTube and monetize this stream because you can't actually do it through the way I was doing it. Hold on, view your channel, manage videos. I'm also gonna add a thumbnail if I can. Monetization on. Save. I'm also going to go into here and add an thumbnail. Hopefully this isn't showing on. There we go. That should work. So I'm going to wait for people to get into the lobby if you're to give a gaming reference. I'm going to see who's on board. No viewers at the moment. Oh, let me get onto what we'll be doing today. This is what we'll be doing today. Let me just click off of that. Get rid of that. So there's a lot of ads in on the website that I'm using, so I'm currently having to just delete them as I go along. I'm just going to wait for people to get in the chat. One viewer at the moment. I'm just going to quickly... We're still a couple of minutes before it hits 11 o'clock, so... Right, I'm going to wait and see if people are going to turn up into chat more specifically. Hi Nedzo says, love you. Okay, that's an endearing message. So as we get into 11 o'clock, I'll just explain the premise of what today's live stream is going to be. So basically, my next video is going to be the greatest season in Formula 1 history, 2012. It'll be a 3-part series where I basically just cover the 2012 season race by race, kind of a bit like if you guys have watched Peter Brook's videos, where he's done like the back marker teams, where he's gone and Sakon Yamamoto on lap 57 overtook Narain car for KN for 21st place. It's going to be kind of like that, not down to the obvious details, but it's basically a detailed analysis of every single race in the 2012 season. But to tide us over, because that video is taking a very, very long time to produce and make, because I want to do it justice. I want to make my best YouTube video so far as my kind of comeback video, and it's taking a long time. In the meantime, we'll be making a list of the top 100 Formula 1 drivers in history. We're using a tier list that I've used many times before, probably about 3 or 4 different times on this channel. This list here, I've actually done this exact video concept, before, but my opinions on a lot of drivers have changed, and I thought that since I need to keep this channel going, and I need to at least do something before I get back onto regular uploading, I thought I may as well do a live stream because it's a lot easier to produce than it is a full-time video. As we see, Jude J. Omieda says Raikkonen is better than Vettel. In some circumstances, yes, he is indeed. Saye Rugara says, rest in peace, Diogo Jota. Yep, I've heard that news today. That was quite tragic. I'm a new F1 fans, so you and Peter Brook helped me to learn about the sport. That is fantastic. I love to hear that people who don't necessarily know about the history of Formula 1 but are willing to learn. I love that people who are willing to learn rather than just being in a bubble. And yeah, I really like that. That's a really good way. So we actually have quite a few people in the chat. Obviously, keep bringing in your comments, ask questions, engage with the video, obviously, engage with the stream, obviously, and we'll get into this video. So what I'm going to do is, you can see here I've got all of the different tiers of all the drivers. I'm not sure exactly because basically I've zoomed in my screen to it so you guys can't see any of the adverts on screen because they're not paying me for the adverts. And so you can go top 10 all the way down to 91 to 100. But once we get to the point where the drivers there's more than 100 drivers, or we start putting some in the not top 100 tier list. So at the moment, since Alex Albon is the first driver, he will go up to first. He's not the best Formula 1 driver of all time. I think we can all agree on that distinction. But because he's the first driver on the list, he's therefore the best driver on the list, if you get me. So we're going to go kind of that way. We're not going to try and say, oh, well, I think that when we get to the end, he might be around 61st, because I'm not willing to put in that much effort to do that for every single driver. So we'll keep putting each driver down until like they come out of the top 100 essentially. Happy birthday to Sebastian Vettel as well, 38. Oh, is he 30? Is his birthday today? Didn't know that. Albon is the GOAT. Yeah, we'll see if he stays in that position by the end. So this list is quite recent heavy, obviously right at the start, because I think basically what they did was they put all of the 2021 drivers in, unless they had some sort of like big achievements. And then yeah, so yeah, I think this list came out in 2022, so you won't have more recent drivers, I suppose. The only real ones you'll miss out on are your Colapintos, your Bearmans, Antonellis, Lawson's, Colapintos. I'm not sure if I've already said Colapinto, but yeah. So we're not missing out on any legends, is what I'm saying. And there's also some pre-war legends, which I won't be adding in because they're not Formula 1 drivers. Giovinazzi, I think we can easily say he is worse than Albon, but not a horrendous driver. He was. See, people see him as fairly underrated nowadays because they look at some of his Q3 appearances in 2021 and they say, oh, well, compared to Raikkonen, he was great and Raikkonen was a champion. The problem was, Raikkonen was, well, by the end of his career, 42, completely past his prime. And although he wasn't as bad as people make him out in his later years, he was still just not the best of the best. And Gio, although he had his moments, he was too inconsistent. Because I remember people were talking about, oh, he keeps having like really good qualifiers and he keeps getting like mistakes or sabotage in the race. It's like, no, the real good drivers don't have those problems. Giovinazzi was pretty damn solid. Yeah, that's how I'd call him. I'd call him solid. I wouldn't call him like fantastic, great, underrated. He definitely shouldn't still be in Formula 1 right now. He's found his pathway in endurance racing pretty well. And I think he doesn't need to go back into that circle of F1 again. So many drivers have done that where they've not found their way in F1, but they found their way in so many other great series. A lot of drivers have realised that and found out how it all works. Latifi, oh great. Go Tifi memes coming in right now. But he's definitely worse than the two of those. We'll quickly go through these drivers because they're not really the most interesting. Mazepin, although I think he's underrated and I think that he's overhated, putting him below all those guys is pretty fair. Lando Norris, I think immediately he goes to the front of this pack, but he's not going to stay there he's not going to stay as the best for long, because George Russell's, actually I wasn't planning on that being so smooth, but George Russell's come along, and George Russell is better than Lando Norris, both historically throughout their careers and just in general. So I should have probably explained this premise before I got started, but essentially what I'm going to base this all on is a mix of raw pace, longevity, and consistency. 3 very simple things. So obviously raw pace is how good you are in qualifying, and race pace combined. So if you're like, for example, Jarno Trulli, it's both qualifying and race pace combined. So you're not like, so qualifying wizards aren't just seen as goats. Longevity, so that's literally just how long you're in the sport. I will probably give concessions for some drivers who have, for example, died before they could reach their full potential, or drivers who, for whatever circumstances, couldn't go longer than they would have otherwise done in a normal career. And consistency is, longevity and consistency obviously aren't the same thing. So, like, for example, a Sebastian Vettel is a perfect example of someone who has a lot of longevity, 15 years in Formula 1, but not as much consistency, because he was only like world class for about 5 or 6 of those. That kind of thing. George is better than Lando, and I agree, says Love You in the chat. Carlos Sainz, you see, the problem is Sainz he's currently in a bit of the doldrums at Williams. See, I'm not sure. Usually, I have sympathy for drivers who are in these bad situations, but it's difficult to say, because there are some drivers who jump into every car and be quick, and there are some drivers who take some time to get up to speed. Hamilton has always been, like, for example, Lewis Hamilton, people say, I'm so surprised that he's taken this long to get used to the Ferrari. I'm not surprised, because he's always been a driver that builds into seasons, and even at his peak years, like Mercedes, like 2016 for example, it took him ages to properly get going. And there are some drivers who are just like that. But to adapt this poorly, because Carlos Sainz is a fantastic driver. He's not, I don't think he's a properly world champion level driver, but he's very good developmentally. He's very good. He's got a very good racing brain. He's still very quick. He's like the modern day Jenson Button, I'd say, because he has everything apart from like dead set instinct pace, like a Leclerc or a Russell or a Max has. I definitely put him above Norris, because he's just far less error prone, even in his current guys. Russell is more consistent than Sainz now, even from the Ferrari and McLaren days. You see, Russell is bulletproof consistent. He was just that's the reason why he had a more lasting. I'd argue that Russell had a more lasting impact as Hamilton's teammate than Rosberg did. And I know people say, "Oh, Rosberg was a champion," but you look at the caliber of cars Rosberg was in and the caliber of cars that Russell was in when they were teammates of Lewis, and Russell was pretty much way better than him in 2022. Was slightly worse in 23 and way better in 24. Meanwhile, Rosberg in 2013 was actually better. People don't realise how underrated Rosberg's 2013 was, because it was before the Mercedes dominance. He sort of kept with Lewis in 2014, but it was clear that Lewis was a better driver. 2015, Lewis had his greatest season, so Rosberg couldn't get anywhere near him. In 2016, Rosberg was slightly better, but Russell overall, his consistency was what brought him ahead of Lewis, because he was, especially in 22 and 23, only marginally quicker by maybe like a tenth, maybe a tenth and a half, 2 tenths at times. But he could maintain that advantage, and I think that's what really kept Lewis's ego down and what kept Lewis's performances and motivation down, because Lewis has always been able to, not always dominate his teammates. Even guys like Bottas, he couldn't always thrash them, but most of the time, or at least 50% of the time, he could keep them down. But with Russell, he couldn't do that, so he didn't have that advantage. Russell is a very good driver. Mick Schumacher. See, there are people I know in the YouTube content sphere who really like Schumacher for some reason, and they say stuff like, "Oh, well, he wasn't given enough time, and he wasn't treated fairly," and yeah, I don't see it because don't get me wrong, he had some good performances. I think Austria, he got like a P6 in 2022, and yes, his rookie year was kind of a write-off because it was in a terrible car. But the thing was, like, people rip on Mazepin, and at the start of 2021, Mazepin was awful. I will give you that, he was completely awful. But towards the end of 2021, in some races, Mazepin was better than, if not equaling, Schumacher. And then against Magnussen in 2022, he got absolutely hammered. And in the point standings, that is, no, I don't. I'm one of those people who doesn't like to use point standings as a beautiful metric for how to rank drivers, because one, there's retirements, because if one driver has 8 retirements and the other has 2, or for example that amount, then you're going to see, obviously there's going to be a discrepancy in the points. See, I've heard that from certain sources that although the points were more in Magnussen's favour, that Schumacher was better in the second half of the season when the car was bad, which I can sort of see, because there are some drivers, ironically, Schumacher's dad, Michael, had that in 2012, where he was better than Rosberg. It's just that when the car was bad, he was better and couldn't prove it, and then when the car was good, he was having reliability problems. But Mick Schumacher, for me, he's just a little bit soft around the edges, and it didn't have a consistency. And like, it wasn't the case that, like, again, Mick Schumacher against Kevin Magnussen. Magnussen wasn't even a good benchmark in his own right, because Magnussen then went up against Nico Hulkenberg in 2023 and 24 and got thrashed. So even if he had beaten Magnussen like 21-0, that's not even a good benchmark. It might be an unpopular opinion, but yeah, Schumacher for me isn't that good. He's better than Mazepin. He's better than Latifi. I wouldn't even say he's better than Giovinazzi though. So I'll keep it. I'm just going to count how many are in this, because you obviously only want 10 in each tier. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we have 2 more to go in this one. Stroll. Right, Stroll is another driver who I think is misunderstood. Because people go, oh, he's the worst driver in Formula 1 right now. His dad paid for him to get into that seat. And it's like, yes, his dad has propelled his career to another level. And without his dad, he probably wouldn't be in the position he's in now. Or he would have taken a lot longer to get there. But he's not the worst driver in Formula 1 right now. But I've even heard people say he's the worst driver in F1 history. That's not even close. He's not even close to being that. And then when I say to people, so you're saying the worst driver on the grid can get pole positions and podiums, and then they're like, yeah, but he makes these stupid mistakes. And he's like, yeah, he does. But there are so many other drivers in Formula 1 history who've made so many mistakes, and even world champions, and even the guy with the most championships and the most wins has made countless errors. It's just that Stroll gets a bad rep because of his supposed reputation. I think that, considering the teammates he's been up against, he went up against Felipe Massa, who, although yes, he was in his retirement year and he wasn't initially supposed to do that year, he was still a good driver and he stacked up well against him. He beat Sergei Sorokin, who was another okay enough driver. He lost to Perez in 2019, okay, but he was better than him in 2020. And people say, again, oh, well, look at the point standings, Stroll had so much less. Stroll had a lot more mechanical and otherwise problems. And that put him behind Sergio, especially in the first half of the season. And then he goes up against Vettel, does pretty well in the head-to-heads. Admittedly, 2023, and 24 against Alonso were a bit bad, because I don't think people expected Alonso to be as good as he was. But 2025, he's been better so far, and I don't care what people say, because people say, oh, well, Alonso went out in Australia and Miami. I think both of those instances were his fault. Because in Australia, well, obviously he just spun out on his own. People say, oh, well, there was gravel on the circuit. It's like, well, if there's gravel on the circuit, you don't go the same way you did it the last 8 laps. And in Miami, the incident with Lawson, this is part of a wider argument for me with Formula 1. I don't think drivers should just be allowed to force another driver off track when there's plenty of room to give them room. I think you should be forced to leave a car's width, regardless of whether you're ahead of the apex. You should have to leave a car's width. and that would have fixed what happened with Alonso and Lawson, because Alonso forced Lawson off a circuit, and he forced him into a runoff area where it was then going to close down, because the wall comes closer and closer to the circuit, and if Lawson kept going straight, he was going into a wall, so he had to make his way back onto the circuit. But Alonso wasn't letting him back on, so they made contact. If Alonso had just left him room, they wouldn't have had that collision, and Alonso would have finished in the points. Don't get me wrong, in the last few races Alonso's been better, but Stroll's also been recovering from an injury, and in the first couple of races Stroll was better. I feel that Lance is overhated. He possibly has the most difficult teammate that overperforms him, but he's a bit error prone and has poor spatial awareness, but he's quick at times. Exactly. I wouldn't say even poor spatial awareness, because a lot of the incidents I find, people just blame him for no reason. Stroll is solid, if unspectacular, to be honest. Miami was more Lawson's fault, to be honest, but anyway. By the rules, absolutely, but I don't agree with the rules, because they're all a bit shit. I'd put Stroll. See, this is also on full careers. So Albon was worse than Kvyat in 2019 in the first half, yet got promoted to Red Bull instead of Danny. Was whitewashed by Max in 2019 and 2020, although he did get a couple of podiums, which was decent, to be fair. He dunked on Latifi and Sargent. I mean, it's Latifi and Sargent. Well done. Got scared by Colapinto when he came in 2024, and I suppose has been beating Sainz, but I still think that Stroll is overall better. Next up is Yuki Tsunoda. Again, this is a driver who's going to suffer a lot of recency bias, because he's doing awful right now, and people are saying, yeah, he's in a bad car and a car that isn't suited to him, but even Sergio Perez towards the end of 2024 with a car that was just about as uncompetitive in Verstappen's hands, if not more uncompetitive, Perez was still getting semi-regular points. And Tsunoda has qualified last so many times and has destroyed the car so many times that I can't... That it is partly the car, but it is also partly him. I think overall in his career, he goes between Albon and Giovinazzi, a decent midfield driver. Yanis Kecha says, I hate this rule as it basically kills racing. I agree. The whole forcing drivers off circuit and ahead of the apex kills racing, because all it does is it says if you're on the inside, you basically have a golden pass to just miss your braking point, force another guy off a circuit, and then well done, you've completed the move. That's not racing. Yep. Zhou. I can just see Hamilton's there. I'm going to put Hamilton more in the pack, because I don't want to just put him straight up there with these guys when that's the thing. Zhou, he's not the worst driver in the world, but he's also not the best. I'd say he's better than Mazepin, better than Latifi, and better than Schumacher overall, because although he had very, very quiet moments, at his peak he was pretty good. Evening from Canberra, lots left. Yeah. Zhou was meh, says, yeah, Saye. I think I do agree, he was mostly meh, but I think he wasn't the most awful driver in the world. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Oh, I need to move Mazepin down to here. Gerhard Berger, okay, that's a new one. Or that's an older one, should I say. Gerhard Berger, he was actually quite a good driver. You look at the calibre of teammates he went up against. People seem to say that John Lacey was a future champion, or should have been a champion but never was, and that he was underrated. But Berger beat him in every single year pretty much that they were Ferrari and Benetton teammates. And overall he was the better driver of the two. He was very good at Benetton. He was very good in his first stint at Benetton, should I say. He was very good at McLaren as Senna's teammate. He was very good at Ferrari. He was very good in both his stints at Ferrari. He was good in both his stints at Benetton. He was good, and then he retired, I suppose. I'd say he's similar to a Sainz in that he was very, very consistent and smart and clever, but hadn't really got the minerals, like the raw pace, for example, that Russell has to be a champion. I'd probably put him ahead of Sainz, but below Russell. because I think Russell is a future potential champion, and Berger wasn't a potential champion. We might look back on this in 10 years and Russell hasn't won a title, so then he goes below. But I think that is how I'd see it. Bottas. You see, Bottas is, again, another number 2 kind of driver who was there or thereabouts, but never really champion material. He had no racecraft. That was one of his major problems. He'd had no racecraft and ability to race other people. He stacked up well against Massa, had his moments against Hamilton, but overall was just told to hold station. And then at Sauber, I mean, he did a whole load of nothing. He was good in 2022, but that was because the car was decent. And although, yes, you could argue, yeah, that's also him. I don't think he's the best of drivers. I think, obviously, he might not have completed his career. He might be going to Cadillac in 26. But he's mostly completed his Formula 1 career, unlike Sainz, unlike Norris. I think that on that basis, I've got to put him above. No, actually, do I put him above Sainz? Because Sainz has been in F1 for 10 years now, 11 years this season. Whereas Bottas had a 12 or 13. Actually, no, I can put Sainz above him then. Bottas was a haul of very good driver, to be honest. Lando is Bottas, changed my mind. You see, the thing is, Lando has the raw pace of a champion. Lando has the same raw pace as Russell, the same raw pace as Max, the same raw pace as Charles. But he delivers it about a third as often as the other guys do. That's the problem. That's the problem. Love You says Bottas below Lando. I disagree because, again, not only has Norris had a much shorter career, he's not been as good for as long, and Bottas did kind of prove he was very consistent when he was good. Didn't you already do this since the title is similar? Yes, I did do this. I did do this video before, but I'm redoing it in the live stream format because I think I looked back on it a couple of weeks ago and saw just how misaligned some of my opinions have become over the last year or so. James Hunt, right. I do like James Hunt as a personality, fantastic personality, what F1 needed at the time, what F1 arguably needs now in terms of a personality. I think that's why people have taken to, for example, Colapinto so much over the past year or so, because he's a refreshing personality who people can relate to and who people kind of see as not just a PR robot, and that's what James Hunt was. He wasn't a PR robot. He, as a driver, obviously had a short career. Compared to, especially for a champion, but just for a driver generally who has lots of success. Yes, only 7 seasons, only 6 of which were I think only 5 of which were full seasons, because he joined midway through 1973 and retired midway through 1979. His 1973 through 75 was pretty good. 1975 itself was excellent. 1976, don't get me wrong, he had a good season, but Niki Lauda was the rightful winner of that championship. And 1977 was good, but by the point he left McLaren, he was completely demotivated and didn't want to do anything. So, ironically, I think let me just do some quick maths. So George Russell is in his 7th season now. James Hunt. So George Russell has about the same length of career right now that James Hunt did. And I think for that reason, and also I think Gerhard, see, this is the trouble I'm having, because Gerhard Berger, I don't think he was as fast as James Hunt, because James Hunt was very fast. But I think that if you put both of them in their peaks, or as an average of their careers, into a generic championship winning car and put them head to head, I think that Berger would win on consistency, because Hunt did crash quite a bit and he was inconsistent and he did have his moments. So I'd probably put Hunt behind Gerhard Berger, but ahead of Carlos Sainz. Hunt straight into one here. I missed Stroll beating Tsunoda, not on my bingo card. Basically, yeah, I said Stroll was a bit underrated. Hold on, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I keep forgetting to move some drivers down, which is frustrating me. But next up is Ronnie Peterson. Right, this man was one of the best never to win a title. I don't think he's the best to never to win a title, but he's one of the best. Raw pace up there with the all-time greats. But he raced in an era. He raced in an era with skeptical reliability, and he didn't help his cars. He did run his cars into the ground by aggressive driving, and that was part of his downfall, because he could, without his aggressive driving, I think he would have won the 1973 championship. He could have also, 1978 was more taken away from him due to, first of all, his death, and second of all, the Lotus favouritism towards Mario Andretti, that he was assigned to be a number 2 to Andretti. But he proved 76, he won a couple of races in a March that shouldn't have been anywhere near a podium, never mind a race win, or maybe even the points, never mind a race win. But I think we can easily say that Peterson goes top of this pile. I don't think I need to have any conversation to decide that. Next up is Jody Scheckter. See, Jody Scheckter is a driver that goes under the radar because most people, especially Drive to Survive fans, only know him because he was the guy who'd last won a title before Schumacher won in 2000. That's if a Drive to Survive fan even knows who Michael Schumacher is, or that he won his first Ferrari title in 2000. But Jody Scheckter was kind of a mini Niki Lauda in a way, because he was very, in his early career, don't get me wrong, he was very reckless and very dangerous. Once he'd ironed that out, he was a solid driver for Tyrrell. He was a solid driver for Ferrari. Again, a short career, 1973 until 1980. So only 8 seasons. One title, and I think he's one of the more forgotten one-time champions, because he came towards the late 70s, early 80s, when there was a lot of one-time champions about. But I think he's really underrated. He was very mechanically clever. He knew how to drive, and remember, he beat Gilles Villeneuve to a title. There are a lot of people in the racing world who say that Gilles Villeneuve was championship potential, and that had he been given a championship potential car in 1982 and had he lived longer, he would have won a title. He had an opportunity to win a title in 1979, and if he really was a great driver, he would have taken that opportunity. Or if he really was like a championship winning driver, he would have taken that opportunity. And again, I've heard people say, oh, he was a number 2 driver, he just wanted to learn from Scheckter. Well, surely if he was really great from the beginning and a naturally talented driver, and the most naturally talented driver of all time, he wouldn't need those circumstances to be able to have to learn from the other guys. Scheckter, I think he's better than George Russell. I think we can confidently say that, because he's about the same career length. 1973 would bring his average down, but Tyrrell, he was fantastic. At Ferrari, he was fantastic. So I am going to put him above George Russell. And then I'm going to move Tsunoda down to the next tier. Next up is Rubens Barrichello, another Ferrari driver. One that is mostly known nowadays for his Ferrari escapades. But he had a career that was way more than Ferrari, because Ferrari only took up about a quarter of his career. His time at Jordan was fantastic, proving himself as a rookie. I mean, those cars weren't the most reliable, with the Yamaha and I think Ilmor engines they had at some points, but he proved himself when the car worked, and even when it didn't work. Donington 93, for example, he was running second when his car blew up. He went up against a plethora of good teammates and beat them. Went to Stewart. I nearly said he won a race. He didn't. He qualified on pole, I believe. Was that France 1999 where he got pole, or was that Johnny Herbert? I think it was France 1999 where he got the pole. He also got the pole in Spa 1994. He was good in those kind of weird wet weather sessions during that era where random drivers could qualify on pole position. He was supposed to be the next Senna, never eventually was. I mean, trying to live up to the mantra of Senna is always going to be a death sentence for any Brazilian driver. It's like trying to say he's the next Pele, or you're trying to say that I'm trying to think of other sports that the next Anderson Silva in, is it UFC? I don't know, but that kind of stuff. Barrichello is a good driver. Lots of consistency, lots of longevity. 19 seasons straight as well. I think Lewis is on to break that record next season for most consecutive seasons in Formula One history. But Barrichello definitely deserves to be up here. I'd say he's definitely better than all these guys. It's when you get up to here that you start having issues. He's better than Bottas because he had actual racecraft. And on his day, he could also beat Schumacher, who is a better driver than Hamilton. Better than Sainz, yes, due to longevity. Better than Hunt, yes, due to longevity. Better than Berger. I think that as a driver, he wasn't as good as Berger, but on longevity, he's slightly better. And then compared to Russell, I think that's where I'd stop, because I think the overwhelming pace of Russell doesn't beat the overwhelming consistency of, or does beat the overwhelming consistency of Barrichello. I doubt anyone ever regretted hiring Rubens. No, I agree with. I'd agree with that as a fair statement. He's just kind of a safe option. Someone who won't give you any trouble and will deliver 95% of what the car's capable of every single race. Then we have, what do we have next? Massa, another Brazilian who was number 2 to Michael Schumacher at Ferrari. But the problem with Massa is he was so inconsistent. Like, for every, like, people talk about certain drivers. Sergio Perez and Oscar Piastri have been kind of, people have looked at their statistics in recent years and said, oh, well, Sergio Perez only does, Sergio Perez, when you're in a country that doesn't like human rights, when he wins in Saudi Arabia and gets pole there. Oscar Piastri won at Baku last year, and I believe the other track he won at was also a Hungary. Yeah, another human rights issue. And that was a kind of a running joke. But Massa was sort of the same. He was a specialist at Bahrain. He was a specialist at Istanbul Park. He was fantastic at some all the Middle Eastern circuits. But he was also wildly inconsistent, because like 2008, while Lewis was putting on one of the greatest drives in Formula 1 history, he spun 5 times and finished outside the points in Silverstone. He had Fuji, where he crashed into Hamilton. He had Australia, where he crashed into Coulthard. He had, I'm trying to think of the other races that season. I can't fully remember all of them. Like, he could perform in the clutch moments. Brazil perfectly personifies that. Pole, win, fastest lap. I'm pretty sure he got fastest lap and led every lap. He did everything he could in that race to win a championship. It just wasn't enough. And then after his accident, the accident did definitely hamper him. But I think that he could still reach the peaks he did before. But again, he just had that same inconsistency, because until he left Ferrari, like 2010 was a decent season for him. It was actually probably his best of his Ferrari stint. 2011 was okay, I guess, although he was getting hit by Hamilton, and he was hitting Hamilton, and he was getting involved in lots of incidents. 2012 was downright awful until the end of the season. 2013 he was so anonymous and again crash prone. Williams, he kind of regained his mojo a little bit, but I'd say that Massa overall, he's better than these lot. No doubt about it. Is he better than Norris? Would I even say he's better? I mean, he's had a much longer career, so actually, yes. I'd actually say he's similar in ability to Norris, because they're both really fast drivers who are quite inconsistent. But Massa has 17 years, when Norris has about 7. Bottas, is he better than Bottas? I wouldn't even say he's better than Bottas, because I think if you put both of those, again, this is the argument that we had with Berger and Hunt. If you put them both in a championship-winning car, neutral championship-winning car, I think Bottas is winning on consistency. When Bottas loses to Massa, he's finishing second. When Massa loses to Bottas, he's finishing 13th. Good enough to be a world champion if Schumacher wasn't around, in my opinion. Had talent just come up versus someone much better, and at Brawn he was getting on a bit in age. Yeah, that's Barrichello, I think, but yeah, that's pretty fair. Nedzo, let's go, says Actuals, thank you. He was so bad in the rain, says Yanis. I'm assuming he's a wet Massa. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he was pretty bad in the wet weather. I mean, he wasn't bad in interchangeable conditions, but yeah, in properly wet conditions, yeah, I think he was. Belgium 08, where he was almost 30 seconds off Hamilton and Kimi. Wasn't that the race? No, are you thinking of the same race that I'm thinking of? Because that was the one where he won, wasn't it? He won because of Hamilton's 25-second time penalty, but I'm pretty sure he was right up with him. He was right up with Kimi and Lewis, wasn't he? Unless that's just me thinking that Raikkonen was actually Massa. That might be the case there. Jacques Villeneuve, as I've heard some NASCAR commentators say. He's quite a disrespected champion, especially in modern circles, because he's been on Sky Sports, and anyone who likes Daniel Ricciardo thinks that he's the Antichrist because he dared to say the truth. But the problem with Villeneuve is people talk about his prime, and people talk about how he was really good from 1996 until 1998 and then fell off after that. This is one of my unpopular opinions. I don't think Villeneuve ever fell off. I think that the words English. I think that the level he showed from 1999 until 2006 was the same level he had when he was in those championship winning years and in those Williams cars. It's just that the cars he was in are underrated. Like, I think that the 1996 Williams and 1997 Williams were just as good as the 1992 and 93 cars. But the difference between those, the difference between those two eras is that the 92 car and the 93 cars were driven by Mansell and Prost, and with the 96 cars they were driven by Damon Hill and Jacques Villeneuve. I think that if you'd have put Michael Schumacher, for example, in that 1997 Williams, I think that he would have won pretty much every race. But Villeneuve underperformed, and I think that's why he could never recapture that magic, because he wasn't in the fastest car anymore. Massa probably is better than Bottas, to be honest. Better racecraft and whatnot. I mean, racecraft, I suppose, but I'd definitely choose Bottas in a title battle over Massa. Hill and Villeneuve are a bit like Piastri and Norris. That is a perfect analogy. I've been saying this for a long time. I think that Villeneuve, to be honest, he's better than Norris. He's better than Massa. He's better than Bottas. Better than Sainz. Better than Hunt. But I think if even if Gerhard Berger was in that 1997 Williams, I think he'd win. I really don't rate Jacques Villeneuve, because in IndyCar he was fantastic, but I think in F1 I think he was definitely a bit embellished by the cars he was in. We have Mario Andretti next. Another driver who was more known for his IndyCar escapades and other series other than instead of Formula One. He had his moments, but his championship was in those circumstances of Ronnie Peterson being the number 2 driver and Ronnie Peterson dying with a race to go, or a couple of races to go. His career doesn't stand out for me. Like, I know he's a champion, but I don't think of any standout drives. I don't think of any amazing performances. I mean, he did come back with Ferrari and I suppose get the pole position at Monza in '82 and get podiums, but apart from that, he's just kind of a nothing burger of a champion. He wasn't full because his career started, I think, in 1968. That's when he started his first F1 race, but he wasn't full time until 1975. So he only did 1975 until 1981 full time, and then a few races in 1982. He only probably had about 8 years of experience in Formula One races. And for that reason, he's not the most consistent. He's not the most longevity kind of driver. But Mario Andretti, I'd go better than all these guys, definitely. Better than Massa, better than Bottas, better than Sainz, better than Hunt, better than Villeneuve. Better than Berger. Would he beat Berger over the course of the season? Probably just. But I don't think his experience trumps Barrichello. Alan Jones, why are we going for all the end of 70s and early 80s champions? Alan Jones, so his career was, he started off with Harry Stiller Racing. He raced for they actually I believe they used the same chassis that the Embassy Hill team used. No, he drove for the Embassy Hill team as well. I think he was one of their first point scorers in 1975. Then he moved to, was it Shadow? This is where I get confused, because I mix up John Watson and Alan Jones, because one of them moved to Shadow and one of them moved to Penske, and one of them won the 1976 Austrian Grand Prix and the other one won the 1977 Austrian Grand Prix, and I can never remember which way around it goes. So I think Jones was Shadow. And I think he won the 1976 Austrian Grand Prix. After that, he eventually found his way to Williams just as they got good. And won the championship. I mean, he was the best driver in 1980. It was, again, F1 in that year, F1 in that period from 1978, after Lauda was in uncompetitive cars, all the way through to about 1984. It was such a transitional time. It was basically the entire time that ground effect was going on, because the order of which car was best changed from season to season, and it was just such a weird time to be in terms of, it was probably the most competitive time in terms of how much the order changed. It was a very good driver, no nonsense, and although again a very short period up top, 1975 until 1981, and then 1985 for a few races in 1986. I'd say that's about 8-9 seasons, so about the same length as Norris and Russell's career already. Maybe closer to Sainz's actually, but you get what I mean. I would definitely say he's better than these lot. Better than Sainz, better than Hunt, better than Villeneuve because he's more consistent, better than Berger, better than Andretti. I think he's better than Barrichello, but that's about where I'd go. Watson was definitely Penske. That win cost him his beard, as he bet he'd never win a race in that tub. We knew he wasn't the greatest ever, but he was the greatest that year. His start was late in F1 too. Jones was solid and consistent, lacked Reutemann's pace, but could deliver more often. Watch classic races. I liked Alan Jones as pundit. He was very blunt and would call out British bias in regards to Schumacher and other subjects of that era. That's good. I like it. I like it when commentators aren't just the same old, same old. That's why when I do my commentary on leagues and stuff, I make sure I put my imprint on it. Speaking of Alan Jones's teammates, Carlos Reutemann. He was teammates to a lot of great drivers and a lot of champions without ever being one. Maybe that's an inkling that he wasn't ever a championship caliber driver. I mean, 1981 I think says different to that, but he comes in. What was his first team? It was he may have driven a March, but the first time I remember him was Ferrari 1970. No, he drove for Brabham. That's what it was. He was teammates with Carlos Pache at Brabham, I believe, and was there in 1975, I believe, and he was there I think in 76 until Enzo Ferrari wanted to replace Lauda with him instantly. They became were they teammates in 77? Yeah, I think they were teammates in 77 because Regazzoni was binned off. He made his way to Williams after that. He was not the first winner. He wasn't the first winner. Regazzoni was, but he was overall a good driver and deserved the 1981 championship. But they cancelled was it the South African Grand Prix? No, it was a Spanish Grand Prix. No, it wasn't. It was a South African Grand Prix they cancelled that he won. No, it wasn't. He won the race, but then they made it a non-championship race for some. I think it was part of a FISA Focal War, and had that race been counted towards a championship, he would have won a championship. So he was a championship caliber driver. Reutemann belongs well up there on the list of greatest drivers never to win a title for me. Superbly fast, incredible natural talent, but for some reasons there were just days where he just wasn't. Yep, I suppose, yeah, Caesar's Palace 1981 is a perfect example of that, because he could have won that title without that problem in South Africa, and then he finished, 9th? Reutemann got like 12 wins, I think. Yeah, he was one of the more winningest drivers that didn't ever get a title. He's better than all these guys, better than Bottas, better than Sainz, better than Hunt. I'd even argue better than Villeneuve due to pure consistency over his career. Obviously, he didn't have as long a career as Gerhard Berger, but I'd put him around, maybe slightly better than Berger, but I wouldn't put him. Would I put him above Andretti? I think on longevity, actually, yeah, I would. Yeah, screw it. Longevity takes him above Andretti. I don't really rate Andretti, so yeah. Next up is Alberto Ascari. He is the first multiple time champion on this list. Obviously, 2 championships in arguably the most dominant era in Formula 1 history. Only 6 seasons, only 5 of which were full time. And even then, I think he only did a handful of races with Lancia in 1954, because of how long that, because basically the original D50 chassis that Fangio ended up taking to the 1956 title was under development in 1954. Sorry, I've just clicked my microphone against my setup, but yeah, he's superbly dominant during his championship winning years, especially 1952. 1953 less so, but I think that was 1 because Fangio existed, and 2 because the Ferrari lost its dominant edge. Ascari did his thing, probably top for now. Ascari suffers because his main success came in the F2 era when only Ferrari were competitive, and he never really faced Fangio directly. He's an interesting one. I think 1953 is the closest he got to being competing directly with Fangio. Fangio said he was the only driver he feared, in terms of as a competitor, which I suppose is good praise for him. Maybe I think he's one of those drivers who could probably match Fangio. This is the case with Fangio with any driver. He could match Fangio on pace, but he could not match his consistency. So I think that he easily goes into the top 3 without much. I think he's better than Scheckter, definitely. But Peterson has the pace. Peterson definitely has the pace, but there's a reason he wasn't champion, and he could have been champion and he wasn't. Ascari, meanwhile, took the opportunity. That's what I think I'd say to that. Bring those guys down here. David Coulthard, the driver with the second most wins without a championship, 13, and he was, don't get me wrong, a long career, 15 seasons. But if you look at the championship winning cars he was in, I suppose, in 1994 Williams, even though it was only for part of the way through a season. 1995 Williams was a championship potential car. The 1998 McLaren was a championship potential car. The 1999 McLaren and the 2000 McLaren were championship potential cars. He had 4 championship potential winning cars and won none of them. And won with none of them in terms of a championship. Yes, he had Hakkinen. Yes, he had Hill. I mean, Hill was not a driver even near the level of Hakkinen, but this is the thing. Coulthard on his day could match guys like Schumacher and Hakkinen, but his day came, again, a half of the time compared to those guys. He was a good experience. He's a great pundit. He knows what he's talking about. I think he had the brains to be a champion, but I don't think he had the raw speed and the raw consistency. I don't think he did. So I think I'd probably put him. He's definitely going up against these guys, champions wise. I think for consistency, he does actually beat Villeneuve, but he's in that category of a Berger and a Barrichello, of someone who was 98% of the way there to be a champion, but didn't have that last 2%. He's a bit like Damon Hill, great performance ceiling, but no consistency. I wouldn't say no consistency. I think he was definitely more consistent than Hill himself, but words English. He just kind of did make those odd errors. Coulthard didn't have that streak of meanness that the champs have. I think he was more, he didn't want to cause issues. Next up, okay, we've got quite a few old Oldens coming up here. We have Jack Brabham. See, Brabham, for a three-time champion, he doesn't stand out for me because 1959 he was amazing, 1960 he was amazing, but 1966 is so far removed. Obviously, it's a 6-year gap. It's the second biggest gap between championships in F1 history, and he was not like the fact that he got dunked on by Denny Hulman the year after kind of proves he wasn't at his best. He just kind of went to the championship in the best car. He should really be a 2-time champion. I think he was a good driver. I mean, he stayed competitive right until the very end of his career. He was 44 in 1970 and was still winning races and getting poles. He would have had a spell such as first half of 2000 and 2001, but then he would fall off a cliff. I think in 1996, the same car, he may have beat Hill. I think he would have. Beat Hill. But Jack Brabham, the 66 title is really odd. Brabham had the only real competitive engine on the grid. If Gurney had stayed at Brabham for 66, Jack would have been hammered. I agree. Dan Gurney was a fantastic driver. I think I'd put Brabham. He's obviously going in these top category guys. Even though I'm ribbing him, he definitely is better than these guys. But see, this is the thing. I don't think he had especially towards the end of his career, he did not have the pace of Ronnie Peterson. But he was an engineer at heart, and he knew how to massage machinery to get to the end of those races. So I think on that basis, especially with his longevity as well, because Peterson had 1970 until 1978, Jack Brabham had 1955 until 1970. I think he has to go in front. Let's just move these guys down. So there we go. Next up is Emerson Fittipaldi, another champion who I don't really rate that highly. He comes into F1 in 1970 off the back of Jochen Rindt's death. Wins his 4th race, which is, don't get me wrong, it's a good feat. It wasn't the best car, but it's a good feat nonetheless. 1971, I believe, was fairly quiet, actually. Either the Lotus wasn't competitive or he wasn't competitive. It could be a mix of the two. 1972, he wins in the fastest car when Jackie Stewart pulls out. Well, I don't think Jackie Stewart pulled out midway through the season, but he kind of sacrificed his season because he wanted to focus on his health. And he had no other competition. Wins that, I suppose, by default. He lost to both Peterson and he was worse than Peterson and Stewart in 73, and then kind of cruised to it in 1974 because he had no competition. He was a very good driver, but I think he was definitely helped by the circumstances of his titles. There were both seasons where there was less competition. There were both seasons where circumstances helped him win the championship rather than anything else. I think if he was truly a great driver, he would have, for example, won 1975 in that McLaren. And I suppose, yeah, he was a good driver. You could see that at Fittipaldi. He was getting podiums in those Fittipaldis that probably weren't deserving of them. But that's the problem with Fittipaldi is he beat Peterson in the same car. He did in the standings, but Peterson had a lot more reliability problems, or they might have been self-induced reliability problems, but Peterson was the faster driver by quite a margin. I think Peterson had 9 poles and Emerson had 1 or 2, or maybe even none. Which kind of just proves how good Peterson was, rather than how bad Fittipaldi was. But he spent 5 seasons at Copa-Sucar doing absolutely nothing, which basically makes his career, the only measurable part of his career is 1970 to 1975, which is only 5 and a bit seasons. Which is why I can't put him up against these guys like Scheckter, even though he has 2 titles. I don't think he's as good as Scheckter. I think that he's better than these guys. He's better than Berger, better than Andretti, is he better than... See, I'd argue he's not even better than Reutemann. I'd genuinely argue that. I'd argue that. I'm going to go with that. He's a really kind of... just their champion. It would have been interesting to see what could have happened if he never indulged the Copa-Sucar silliness. Fittipaldi staying at McLaren until the early 80s is an interesting what if. Yeah, that's pretty fair. Between Reutemann and Andretti. That's ironically where I've just put him. There we go. Hill. Obviously, this is Graham Hill. Now, funnily enough, I've heard a lot of people say that Graham Hill actually didn't rate himself as a driver. He said he had a lazy driving style and that he was just not that great of a driver, but I disagree. Don't get me wrong, he wasn't as good as Jim Clark, but very, very, very few people were. But he was a good engineer. He was good at developing cars. He was very kind of, he was laid back, but that probably helped him stay alive in the era that he drove. He was at the time the most longevity based driver in F1 history, at least up until Rubens Barrichello came along, 1958 until 1975. Like, I think for a video I found a stat that between his first race and his last race, 34 drivers died while driving in Formula 1 races. 34. You could fill up an entire grid and much more with the drivers that had died during his time. Just on that longevity is amazing. He was fantastic at Monaco. The reason why Jim Clark has no success at Monaco is because of Graham Hill. He was so good there. 1962 he wins because he's in the best car and there's not really much competition. And 1963 he wasn't really anywhere because I don't think the BRM was as competitive. But 64 he deserved that title over Surtees because Bandini took him out in the final race. 65, was that the year he moved? No, it wasn't the year he moved to Lotus because he was still there with Jackie Stewart at BRM. But by the time he did move to Lotus, he wasn't as good as Clark. And I think we could all see that. But he didn't need to be as good as Clark because, he won it in 68 when Clark died. It's annoying because by 1969 he was clearly past it. He was 40 years old. And the leg break at Watkins Glen pretty much sealed his fate as kind of a driver who wasn't going to ever get any more success. He had a couple of good races after that. Given his condition, I think South Africa 1970, he got a point when he couldn't even move after the race, and I think he got a couple more points after that. But yeah, Hill is Salieri to Clark's Mozart. I don't really know classical music, so I wouldn't know. Technically very, very strong, just not a genius. There's no crime in being a grafter. I rate him highly because of how far he got on the grit and craft. Mr. Monaco doesn't rate himself, but won at Monaco multiple times, Indy 500 and Le Mans 24-hour. That's humility, man. Yeah, it is. The drivers of that era were very humble, and he said humil. He was also very witty and very funny. I've seen lots of not lost media footage, but TV footage of him and Jackie Stewart and Jim Clark on TV shows, and they're joking with each other, and he's got a very dry kind of witty sense of humour. He would have been perfect after he left Formula 1. If the Hill team went nowhere, which it probably would have done, he would have been perfect as a pundit. He would have been perfect as a pundit, perfect as a commentator. He would have been great to go alongside Murray Walker. But that never happened because of his plane accident. I think as a driver, he's better than all these guys. He's better than Alan Jones. He's better than George Russell. He's better than Scheckter. He's better than Peterson. He's better than Brad Maloney. I'd even say he's better than Ascari. I think he's the best driver we've had so far. Did he win Indy though? There are some who strongly feel he didn't. Oh yeah, because in oval racing, even NASCAR is especially prominent with this, where there's a lot of scoring errors because people can't seem to find out the order because of how difficult it is, which is fair enough. Next up is Jenson Button. Another British champion. Lots of longevity again. 17 seasons. Full time, 18 seasons if you count Monaco 2017. Smooth, the original smooth operator. The best driver not in changeable conditions, but in greasy kind of when you're on the wrong tyres for the condition. Perfect driver for that. But he was not the best. I think he's gone up against good drivers and matched them or done well. He was good against Ralf Schumacher. He was decent enough against Trulli, I guess. He was I think Fisichella was his teammate at one point as well. I don't really remember much about 2001 and 2, but he crushed Villeneuve. He crushed Sato. He crushed Davidson, obviously, in his two couple of races. He was better than Barrichello, I think, in 2006 and 7. Maybe not in 08 because of Barrichello's podium, but he crushed Barrichello in 09. He, especially in the early season when the car was competitive, he did. When the car became uncompetitive, Barrichello was better, but he was good against Hamilton in 2010, much better in 2011, and I suppose very stinky in 2012, but his peaks were still decent. He was good in 2013, very good in 2014, one of his underrated seasons actually. He stacked up well against Alonso, and I mean, he outqualified, I think, Stoffel Van Dorn in the one race he did in Monaco. So, he was a good driver. I put him up here. I think he's better than Jones. I think he's better than Russell. I think he's better than Scheckter. This is longevity as well. I think he's better than Peterson on longevity only, though. I don't think he goes above guys like Brabham. Was he thrashed by Giancarlo? I think that's only one season anyway. It's 2001. He's a season into his career. I think I can give him some thingy for that. Some credit for that. Sterling Moss. You see, there are a lot of people who say Sterling Moss is the greatest driver never to win a championship. He isn't. Because you look at the chances he had to win a championship. 1955 had a chance to win a championship in a good car. 1956 had a chance to win a championship in a good car. 1957 had a chance to win a championship in a good car. 1958 as well. 1960. No, maybe not 1961. But he had so many chances and he didn't take any of them. Either through his gentlemanliness, either through his kindness, but he didn't take any of them. He was too much of an understudy to Fangio to really show his proof there. And elsewhere, he didn't have enough of a gap over guys like Hawthorne, guys like Brooks, guys like Collins to really make a difference. He was just too nice. Too nice to be. I think he did kind of bridge the gap between Fangio and Clark, like someone in the comments has just said. But that's because it was a pretty weak field, apart from Brabham and him. I agree he wasn't yet at his best. He was beaten by Ralph on the debut season as well. And an example of why giving time for a driver to grow is important. Yeah. Moss, I think he has to go amongst these guys. How long was his career? 1954, I think it was, until 1961. So I don't think he did any races in 1962 before he crashed. So 7 seasons. I think he's better than Alan Jones. Is he better than George Russell? Yeah. Better than Jody Scheckter? Yes. But I wouldn't say he was better than Ronnie Peterson. That's where I draw the line. Jean Alesi, this guy annoys me when we're talking about debates for who are underrated champions or underrated guys who should have been champions. Because Jean Alesi, he comes into F1, don't get me wrong, comes into F1 and beats Senna at his own game in Phoenix. Fantastic drive, and he shouldn't have been doing that in that car. But he gets to Ferrari in 1991, gets absolutely demolished by Alain Prost, both in qualifying and race trim. He goes up against Ivan Capelli and Nicola Larini in 1992. Okay, well done. They bring in a decent driver for 1993. And from 1993 until 1997, when him and Berger were teammates, Berger was clearly the better driver. He goes up against, I think it was Heidfeld in 1998. Was it Heidfeld? No, it was Johnny Herbert, sorry. Johnny Herbert in 1998 with Sauber. And from what I remember, he wasn't much better than Herbert, if better at all. 1999, I think he was at Prost. Was it with Panis as his teammate? Or was it Diniz? It might have been Diniz. So, I mean, Diniz is a nothing teammate. He was against Heidfeld in 2000, I remember that. Heidfeld was slightly better, I think. And then in 2001, he was demolished by Trulli. This is the problem with Jean Alesi, is he was a good driver on his day, and he had those great performances that made you think, wow, he's really good. But you also had those performances where he was just average. He was just average. The one win he got it because of luck. And I know he lost a couple of wins and a couple of good results because of luck as well. But the fact that he only won one race, with the cars and the teammates that he had, considering what his teammates did, kind of proves that he's not really the best. I'd probably put him, he's above Norris, he's above Massa. In fact, is he above Massa? I'd argue they're both the same kind of inconsistency. So actually, no, I don't think he's above Massa. Everyone seems to agree with that. Let's see, Moss deserves at least a couple of titles. He could win in multiple teams as well. I watched the 50s very recently and he absolutely stood out, especially in the second half of the decade. I think that was just because Fangio kind of, not tailed off, but Fangio wasn't in there in 1958 and 1959. And as I said, Brabham was the only other driver who was even on their level, or even on that level. And I think he could have won 1958 if he'd have been a bit more, obviously, a bit more selfish. And maybe 1961 if he was in a better car, but it's just because the other guys weren't as good. That's the only way he would have won a championship, because he was in a fast car and the other guys weren't as good. Giancarlo Baghetti, a race winner, the worst race winner in Formula 1 history. I think we can easily. There's not really much to talk about here. I want to go through and describe every driver's career, but I've got to leave at 45 minutes past 1, so that is an hour and 45 minutes time, so I can't be going through every single driver. I think he's better than guys like Latifi and Mazepin, but he's not better than anyone else. Lorenzo Bandini. I think that, well, obviously another one-time race winner. I can't remember. He raced, I think, from 1962 until 1967. Got involved in that incident with Graham Hill that lost Surtees the championship. Was overall a decent driver, but only one win. Hello, Mabini Games. Hope you're enjoying the stream, or hope you can enjoy the stream from now on. Lorenzo Bandini, I think that he was better than these guys, obviously. Better than Norris, better than Alesi. But I would leave it there, actually, because I think Massa's longevity kind of puts him on another level above those guys, above the rest of them. Jean-Pierre Beltoise. Jean-Pierre Beltoise is an interesting one because he had one fantastic race. He had Monaco 1972 where he won by 37 seconds over Jackie Ickx in the rain when Jackie Ickx was a wet weather specialist. Fantastic driver, or fantastic drive that was. But his overall F1 career was pretty underwhelming in terms of like what you'd expect compared to champions and compared to other race winners. I've heard that he did have some sort of, not disability, but I think he had some sort of issue that made it hard for him to shift gears, and that's why he was decent at Monaco. It's pretty hard to stand out versus Fangio, to be honest. He did an awful amount of retirement in that 58 that cost him as well. Yeah. But yeah, let's go back to Beltoise. So one-time race winner. I think he's better than all these guys. Actually, considering that Stroll's had a similar length career, I'd actually argue that Stroll's been better than Beltoise. Joe Bonnier, another one-time winner. The Netherlands 1959. I can't remember if he won that on merit or if it was just because the BRM was like the best car that day. I don't think it was. I think he might have just had one of those out of the blue performances. I'd probably go Jack Brabham over Ascari, to be fair. I wouldn't because I know Ascari had no longevity, but I think he was better for more of his career than Brabham was. Bonnier, I think he's better than these guys, but I wouldn't. No, in fact, actually, I wouldn't even put him above. I wouldn't even put him above Giovinazzi nowadays because, like, he was that kind of driver. I think if you'd put Giovinazzi in the 1950s, well, that level of driver in the 1950s, I think he would just win the odd race because it was a lot more variable the performances back then. Let's go with Vittorio Brambilla. Very reckless, but he did get his one win on merit in 1975 at the Austrian Grand Prix, pouring it down with rain. The Monza Gorilla wins his only race. Otherwise, very inconsistent. He didn't even have any other podiums, which kind of proves just how inconsistent he was. But he got the race win. You can't deny that, especially in the most tricky conditions possible. He did crash going over the finish line, which is also quite funny. But we can have a look and we can go with maybe around about the Tsunoda Giovinazzi range. I'll probably put him there, just above Tsunoda, because I think he was definitely generally a good midfield driver. Francois Sever. Some said he was a future champion. See, I haven't really analysed his career to properly see if he was a future champion. But he was there from 1968. I think he did the German Grand Prix round in the F2 car, which doesn't really count. So maybe 1969 until 1973. Very short career, obviously. Not his fault, but it was a short career. One race win. This is what surprised me. People say he was a future champion and he would have taken over from where Stewart was and would have won titles with Tyrrell. But for me, like, Tyrrell was one of the more competitive cars in 1971. It was in 72 and it was in 73. He only got one win in that time. And I know he was playing second fiddle to Stewart. And that means that any race that Stewart won, he was going to finish second, and even if he was faster. But the fact that he didn't win any other races, because those cars were unreliable. And those cars were... so surely Stewart would have retired in a race and Sever would have won. But no, he only did that once. So something tells me he wasn't really... Like, he might have been a future champion in like a dominant car, for example. But I don't think he was a bona fide like Lauda or Peterson or Scheckter or anything like that. I don't think he was. That's the way I see it, personally. Sever, I think, must go... Again, a short career, which kind of means he's stuck in this thing where he can't get up to Massa's level Massa's level, because he's quick, but he doesn't have 17 years of experience. This is the problem now. Next up is Luigi Fagioli. Fagioli's an interesting one, because if this included pre-war Grand Prix careers, you'd probably have a lot more to work on. But this man had only 1.5 years in Formula One. He had two teammates who were better than him in 1950, and he won one race in 1951, but it wasn't due to his own driving. It wasn't due to his own driving, it was due to what was it? It was due to Fangio taking over his car and sharing it with him, and he just drove it to a race win. Fagioli otherwise would not be remembered in Formula One. He was the oldest race winner in F1 history, 53 years old. And he was a good driver, don't get me wrong. He was just a bit past his best. But he wasn't on the level of Farina or Fangio. Let's have a look. I think I'd probably put him... I wouldn't even put him as good as Albon. Would I? Would Albon have won races? Maybe I will put him above Albon, but not as good as Beltoise. Pierre Gasly's next. Another one-time race winner, surprisingly. And he is... Baghetti is the worst race winner of all time. He is. He literally looks into that race when he qualified 11th in the fastest car. I think he was about 4 seconds off his teammates at a track which is pretty much all straights. And it took all the other top guys to fall out of contention to be able to only win by about half. It was literally a tenth of a second that he won by. So yeah, Pierre Gasly. He's a very good midfield driver. And one of those guys who I think will be I think by the time he's retired, Gasly will be seen in the same vein as Hulkenberg, Fisichella, those kind of guys who are, maybe even Heidfeld, those guys who are kings of the midfield, essentially. And that's not a bad thing. That's a great career to carve out. 10, 15 years in midfield cars and getting podiums here and there. Obviously, Hulkenberg hasn't done that, but getting podiums here and there, even the odd race win like Gasly's got, that's a fantastic career. I think he's, especially on longevity, better than Albon, better than Fagioli, I think, yes. Better than Beltoise, better than Stroll. I'd even argue, considering he's been here for longer and he's been more consistent, better than Norris. Would I say better than Alesi? See, again, Alesi had a lot more prime. A better prime, but didn't have the overall. I think when you get to Bandini and Cervera is when you start to struggle. I say it's better than Bandini, but that's about it. Baghetti also won. So people are talking about Baghetti and comparing him to Brambilla. The thing is, Baghetti's winning claims was definitely on merit. It wasn't. I'm sorry, it wasn't. All of the free works Ferrari's retired. I'm pretty sure. I think I worked out because I did a video on this exact topic, this exact race, and I think 6 or 7 drivers in front of him on the grid retired. And the ones who didn't were in crap cars, like Lotuses in 1961, and BRMs and stuff like that. It's like, come on, Baghetti was not a good driver. He was like, yes, he might have won a couple of non-championship races, but the problem with non-championship races is there was some where genuinely about 10 people turned up and none of them were proper world-class drivers. Norris is definitely better than Gasly. I disagree, because Gasly, I think if Norris and Gasly were going to a title battle now, I think Norris would be faster, and I think Norris would get most of the pole positions. But I think that Gasly would finish second to Norris when he wasn't on his game. But when Norris isn't on his game, I think he'd finish like 3rd, 4th, 5th, and he'd lose points that way. Why is Strollmacher not number 1? You guys never fail to make me laugh. And also people saying Brambilla was an amazing driver in the wet, and people said that Brambilla's win wasn't on merit. He was in the pouring rain at one of the hardest circuits on the calendar, and he won in a car that wasn't the best. Next up is Peter Geffen. You want to talk about someone who didn't really win on merit, is Peter Geffen. Because although don't get me wrong, in certain series, NASCAR, IndyCar, slipstreaming and working the draft and finding the best line and the best slipstream to win right at the line is a talent, and it is a very hard thing to do. But in Formula 1 less so. I mean, obviously the race at Monza up until 1971 was a slipstream fest, and it was basically what that is. It was basically a NASCAR race. Who can draft the best? And he did do that, and he did win. The closest win in Formula 1 history. But other than that, he was just an average driver. Without that win, you look at his career, it's blindingly average. Maybe he could have used that as a... Nowadays, if he was to win a race like that, he could propel himself into an IndyCar career. He could do that. I'm not even sure if he might have even done like American Open Wheelers, but I think he was just blindingly average, kind of up with these guys. Kind of, was he better than... See, Brambilla was fantastic in the wet, and Brambilla otherwise was either crashing or being in the midfield. I suppose Geffen didn't do as much crashing, so I suppose he's up here. I wouldn't say he's as good as Fagioli, because Fagioli was kind of half consistent. Next up is Richie Ginther, one-time race winner, Honda's first race winner, 1965 Mexican Grand Prix. I mean, he was in the 1961 Ferrari and flopped even harder than Phil Hill and Von Trips. He was in a couple of championship winning cars. He was a decent driver, but that, again, I think he was slightly above decent, but that's about it. I think I put him up with the guys like Norris. I put him between Norris and Stroll, I think, in my opinion. Ina's Ireland. Again, another kind of late, early to mid 60s peddler. Someone, a peddler is someone who I call like a decent driver, someone who is just there. Jenson Button is in the right place as well so far. Thank you. But yeah, Ina's Ireland won that one race at Watkins Glen in 1961. But otherwise was just a midfield kind of driver. He was better than Jim. This is part of the reason why I say Jim Clark isn't the GOAT, because when it took Jim Clark a long while to get going, during 1960 and 1961, Ina's Ireland, Cliff Allison, those guys were better than him, which maybe make that that's part of the reason why I don't think Jim Clark is the GOAT. But Ina's Ireland in this kind of field would be kind of, I'd say, just around about here, maybe around where Albon is. Yeah, just underneath Albon, I'd say. Ireland is underrated for me. Put some seriously fast drivers in some big non-championship races in the early 1960s. Again, I don't know about the non-championship races. I only know about non-championship races when they're there for statistics or they're there for certain events. And like, for example, like Senna at the 1984 Race of Champions. I know that wasn't a official non-championship event, but you get what I mean. I only know those kind of events when they have a historical significance. I don't know anyone. Maybe that's on me, and I need to clue up on them. But especially when it's F1 drivers all the time, I don't really want to count non-championship races into the ranking. Heikki Kovalainen, another one. I think, yeah, literally, if you can, I'm not sure if you guys can see this, but we're going through all of the one-time race winners up until we get to Trulli, and then we'll go to the other champions. So that should, so we've got Kovalainen. He got his one win because of Massa's blow up on the final lap, in the last 3 laps in Hungary, 2008. He wasn't a bad driver. He was good. It was fantastic in 2007. Beat Fisichella in an upper midfield car in 2007. He got ghosted by Hamilton in 2008. He was actually better than him in the first half of 2009, but when the car got good, he was worse. But his career was just kind of killed by the fact he joined Caterham. He joined Caterham, and that's what killed him. He was very good nonetheless, but I think if he was around nowadays, not in his current guys, but if he'd have started his career in 2020, I think he'd be a similar level to a Gasly or maybe an Albon or someone like that. He is just kind of one of those midfield drivers that is just kind of there. He's not one of the upper midfield drivers. He's just kind of there. I'd probably put him around where Gasly is, maybe below Bandini. For me, Moss and Hawthorne, both Moss and Hawthorne won 1958, but anyway, that's fine. You can have your opinions. See, having both drivers, that's kind of alien to me, having both drivers win a championship, because I think that one's got to win it. But that's kind of a way to look at it, I suppose. Kubica, right. You see, if we're going this purely on a empirical basis, we take into account 2006, or the latter half of 2006 through to 2010. And then we have to add 2019 into the averages. And I know it ruins the averages, and it's not and I know it's not the full Kubica, but it is still Kubica, and it is still his Formula 1 career. He had a great 2006. He had a decent enough 2007. Heidfeld was better, but it was decent. He was the best driver in 2008, but that's because Massa and Hamilton were crash prone. Alonso was inconsistent. Raikkonen was being sabotaged. And no one else was really in the top car. So that's why Kubica was the best driver of 2008. It wasn't because he was fantastic. It was because he was great in a season where everyone else was just good. 2009, I suppose he did well with what he could. With the machinery he had in 2010, he was fantastic. And 2019, he was awful. This is the issue. You've got half a season, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4.5, 5.5 seasons to work with here. So I think he can't go up with guys like Massa, but I think he can go up with guys like Sever. I think I'd probably put him on the same level as just above Gasly overall, because I think at his peak he was fantastic. Next up, you see, I think a lot of people are going to disagree with me here, but I think you need to redo your best drivers winning championship, because 2008 you said it was Hamilton over Kubica. Yeah, I realised after I did that video there was a million mistakes. I will probably get back to doing that video at some point. Pastor Maldonado. And some of you guys would have watched me on the DRS Train podcast, and some of you guys would have watched me on some of the other stuff I do. And basically, I know other people other YouTubers have certain drivers that they fawn over, well, not fawn over, but that they support. Peter Brook has Sebastian Vettel. Ciaron Smith has Kimi Raikkonen. Who else? I mean, the other podcast host we have, Nav, has Fernando Alonso. Ace has Fernando Alonso. All those guys. Josh Revel has Liam Lawson. My driver of that, well, nowadays it's Ollie Bearman, but for Formula 1 history, it's Pastor Maldonado. Pastor Maldonado for me is one of the most underrated drivers in history, because on his day he was just as fast, if not faster, than Hamilton, Vettel, Alonso, Raikkonen, those kind of guys. He was just as quick, if not quicker than them. And he was in not good machinery his entire career. When he had the opportunities to take good results, he did. And a lot of the blame he gets for crashes and for inconsistency is actually not his fault. Sure, he crashed a lot in free practice, and he made a lot of mistakes in those free practice sessions. And you look at him. I saw a reel of him yesterday where he it was 2014 Chinese Grand Prix practice where he made an adjustment on the steering wheel and spun because he veered off track and wasn't looking where he was going. That's stupid. But the fact that he took the 2012 Williams to places where it didn't belong is part of the reason why I think you look at that car. I think it was the 5th fastest car for most of the season. It wasn't. People who say, it was the fastest car in Catalonia, it wasn't. If that car was faster because people have talked about conspiracies of special tyres and the Williams for that one race was fastest. If that Williams was the fastest car for one race, Bruno Senna wouldn't have had his second worst qualifying all year. Maldonado was a king at that circuit. He was faster than Barrichello by multiple seconds in 2011 in qualifying and finished way ahead of him in the race. He was fantastic at that circuit, and he won that race on merit against Alonso. If you're looking at the drivers who had one race win, his win was the hardest of anyone to get. He had Fernando Alonso bearing down him in the entire race. The Ferrari was a faster car. It wasn't the fastest car, but it was the faster car than the Williams. Obviously, Alonso was the best driver of 2012. It was on Fernando's home turf. If you're talking about the circumstances, if Maldonado had have locked up in one corner, let Alonso by and finished second, even that would have been a fantastic drive. But no, he won in a car that was slower, with the odds stacked against him. And that, for me, is part of the reason why that win and him as a driver is so underrated. If you look at those results, like for example, people talk about how he only has one win and he only has one podium and his next best result is 5th. But he had so many good results, especially in that season, taken away from him due to factors outside of his control. You look at, I think I calculated it. I think if he took out only the things that weren't his fault, he gains because he finished on 45 points. If you take out all the things that weren't his fault, he ends up on about 100 points. He ends up doubling his points tally because you have races like Malaysia. He had an engine failure with a couple of laps to go. He would have lost a point there. He had okay, let's go through. See, this is where I go to the Europe, the Valencia Grand Prix. He was going to overtake Hamilton for third. I have always thought that incident was Hamilton's fault because you're on the final lap of the race. You're battling for a position. Maldonado is ahead under braking, yet Lewis still forces him off track. Maldonado has the opportunity to either cut the corner, rejoin ahead of Lewis, and then let him back through when there's no other places to overtake on the circuit, or he can try and rejoin adjacent to him as safely as possible, and hope that Hamilton leaves him space. If Hamilton had left him space on the inside of that left-hand corner, they wouldn't have made contact because Maldonado was making his way back onto the circuit. But Hamilton didn't leave space. Hamilton never left space in his McLaren career. That's 15 points lost. In Belgium. In Belgium, Maldonado qualified third, got dropped to 6th because he impeded Hulkenberg in Q1, even though Hulkenberg then progressed to the next session, so it didn't matter that he impeded him. He jumped the start. Yes, fair enough. He got up to second, jumped the start. Had he not been involved in that turn 1 incident, he would have finished on the podium. I know he'd have got a drive-through penalty, but he would have finished on the podium because the guys who were behind Button and Raikkonen were... No, Button, Vettel, I think it was, who finished second, and Raikkonen were well off the pace. He would have finished third anyway. Singapore, he had hydraulics failure when he was running third. And I think that was all it was really for... If you look at the other things, for mistakes that he made, he would have made even more points. Australia, he would have finished 5th. He would have finished ahead of Alonso. Monaco, he qualified 9th, but he ran into Perez in FP3 and crashed into De La Rosa at the start. Canada, he would have been going to Q3 had he not made a mistake on his last run in Q2 and would have made his way up through the pack. And then you've got like Hungary, he was running like 9th or 10th when he got a drive-through penalty for pushing DRS off a circuit when it was just like he breathed on him. Then you've got stuff like India. He was running in the points when he had collisions with Senna and Kobayashi. Oh, I forgot Abu Dhabi. Abu Dhabi. He was running third when his KERS failed and he finished fifth. That was his second best result all year. He had Kota, I believe. No, Kota he finished in the points. Brazil, he qualified sixth, I believe. Got dropped to 16th with a 10-place grid penalty, and then made a ton of positions upon the opening lap, and then spun off on the second lap. I think I made a calculation that if all the drivers had their perfect season in 2012, Maldonado would have finished 8th in the standings in a car that definitely didn't deserve that. The craziness of Maldonado's career was he got Spain 2012 on merit, and to be fair, he was great at Abu Dhabi 2012 as well. You have Hill and Button in top 10 drivers ever. At the moment, yes, because I haven't got to the other drivers. Lol, not the other drivers are there yet. Sweet lol. 43, watch both their full careers. They're both looking to be in rocket ships, and way better drivers never got a world championship. Valencia 2012 was a racing incident. I believe it was Hamilton's fault. The rules are quite clear. You are entitled to space if you're at least round the outside as the attacker, and halfway alongside the inside. Your racing line is yours if you're attacking the apex first. You're entitled to space if you're at least round the outside as the attacker, and halfway alongside on the inside. So yeah, Maldonado was ahead of Hamilton on the outside in that Valencia 2012. But basically, I think Maldonado's underrated. Not just 2012, but 2015 was a great season for him. In all of his seasons, he either outscored his teammates or better than them across the season. At Monaco 2011, another great result. That Williams was awful, and he nearly took it to a 7th place finish, but until Hamilton took him out yet again. So yeah, Maldonado, better than these guys. You see, this is an argument I made on Twitter the other month. This was, I think, when Norris crashed in Jeddah qualifying. I said I would rather have 2012 Pastor Maldonado in the McLaren than 2025 Lando Norris, because Maldonado wouldn't make mistakes as frequently. I know that's a statement to make, but the thing is, Maldonado would crash in free practice, or he's made mistakes. But in a championship winning car, I don't think he'd be pushing as hard. I don't think he'd be trying to get the absolute maximum out of the car as much, because he knows that if he just cruised at 99%, he would finish second. And so I actually think he's better than Norris. I think he's better than Alesi as well, because Alesi was also inconsistent. Better than Kovalainen, because Kovalainen is just boring. Better than Bandini. I think when you get to Gasly is when I'd start to say, actually, no, he's not better. Jochen Mass, this guy. We've gone from some really good drivers to a stinky one-time winner. Only won that one race at Spain in 1975 because everyone else crashed out or had engine issues, and it was just a terrible race. He should have never won that. It should have been either Jackie Ickx, it should have been Rolf Stommelen, it should have been anyone that wasn't him. He qualified 12th in the fastest car. Come on. He was one of the worst one-time race winners. I'll put him about the same level of Bonnier. Musso, good driver. I saw that Ferrari documentary thing that was based on the mid to late 50s, one with Alfonso Di Portago, Eugenio Castellotti, those guys, and Musso obviously is a protagonist in that. I believe that he probably goes around here, just ahead of Norris. Sorry, just behind Norris, ahead of Ginther. Alessandro Nannini, great driver to be fair. Had his career hampered by his disability. Nannini, I'd say 1989 Suzuka, obviously, he wasn't the best driver that day. He wasn't even the second best driver that day. He was just in the position to be able to take away from Senna and Prost when they crashed. But a decent midfield driver. I think he could have gone on to win a couple of races on merit, but that helicopter accident really stopped him. I'd probably put him worse than Stroll, better than Beltoise. Gunnar Nilsson, gone too soon. He was a very good driver. But yeah, he only had like 2 seasons in his career. He was better than Jochen Mass. Maybe better than Brambilla, but I think on pure longevity, we can't put him any higher than that. I'm just skipping through a lot of these drivers here because I've realised that I've spent a lot of time waffling on other drivers, and I'm not going to get this done if I'm not thinking before my time. Ocon and Gasly are pretty much inseparable in terms of their careers. Both been in since about 2016, 2017. Both been at solid midfielders that entire time. Gasly's more consistent. Ocon does tend to be less consistent, especially this season. He's getting dunked on by Behrman quite a bit. But I would actually, yeah, I'd say Gasly is slightly better than Maldonado. Actually, no, because I think Maldonado was championship potential, but Ocon isn't, because he's too inconsistent. I know Maldonado was also inconsistent in his time, but I don't think he was. I know he was more inconsistent, but I think his peaks were better. Ocon has better peaks, though, especially in the wet. Yeah, he does. Ocon has better peaks than Gasly. But this is the whole thing. I've a lot of people for example, on the podcast that I go on, they say Ocon has 7 good races a year, or 7 great races a year. That's the problem. Gasly will have like 14, 15 really good weekends a year, whereas Ocon will have less than 10. I don't know Giovinazzi was a quick driver, just like Maldonado, but what made you rank him very low, unlike with Maldonado? Giovinazzi was quick, but like I didn't see much. I didn't see him putting the Alfa Romeo in the top 5, for example. I didn't see him putting the Alfa Romeo really, really high up the grid where it definitely shouldn't have been. Whereas with Maldonado, that's what I saw, and also Antonio Giovinazzi, like he had a decent enough benchmark, and he didn't really usurp that benchmark by enough, in my opinion. Carlos Pace, or Pass, or I'm not the expert on Portuguese pronunciation, so I wouldn't know. But he got his 1 win at his home track in 1975. Most people don't even know it's named after him. They don't even know who Jose Carlos Pace is. He was a decent driver. Only had a few years. I think it was 1973 until 1977 before his helicopter crash. I'd probably put him ahead of Stroll, ahead of Ginther, ahead of Musso. Probably just behind Norris, though. Right, we've now done 50 drivers. Right, and I need to just hope that most of the guys left, because you can see how many drivers we've got to do. I just need to hope that most of them are stinkers, so I can just instantly put them in this not 100 category. Panis, yeah, he was a very solid midfielder. Ocon has 23 points, Behrman has 6. How's he being dunked on? Okay, by that logic, Alonso got dunked on by Ocon in 2022 because he had more points. I don't get how people use just points as the default, because Behrman, I'm pretty sure there's been about 11 race weekends so far, hasn't there? 12 race weekends maybe. Behrman's had bad luck in about 8 or 9 of them in terms of qualifying or the race trim, in terms of different strategies. I think I'm not going to get up my Excel spreadsheets because that's not the point of this stream. But on my spreadsheets, in terms of qualifying gaps and race gaps where there's no outside factors, when it's just those two against each other, Behrman's been faster. I think it's by about a 10th in qualifying and by a couple of seconds in the race. It's not massive, but Behrman has been better when he's not had stupid penalties, when he's not had been held up in dirty air, when he's not had all these other problems. Yeah, Olivier Panis, good, decent midfield driver. When did he started his career? In 1994, I'd say. Went until 2004, so 10, 11 years, decent enough career. But I think he's better than these guys. Is he better than Carlos Pace? Yes. You see, I think if Prime Panis was to race Norris, 1997 Panis was to race Norris into a championship, I think he'd actually win. I think he'd also beat Alesi and Kovalainen. Hold on a second. I think I've got something wrong here. I think Norris is slightly underrated here. I think Kovalainen is overrated. I think that's the problem we've got here. Kovalainen needs to go down to about here. And then that might fix, because I keep putting certain drivers too low. I think that's a problem we've got here. Maybe Bandini goes above Ocon. I need to just keep an eye on these. Next up is Ludovico Scarfiotti. Genuinely one of the most obscure race winners in F1 history. If I was to ever go on Pointless and I was to get list of Formula 1 race winners and I had to guess the most obscure F1 race winners, I'd go for Ludovico Scarfiotti because no one knows who he is. 1966 Italian Grand Prix. And other than that, I think he did about 10 races in his total F1 career, and one of them was a win. I think he only got like one other points finish. Now, I think it was similar to Baghetti in that a lot of the people dropped out, but he wasn't as egregious. I don't think the Ferrari was as good in 1966. It might have been on Monza because obviously Ferrari would often develop their cars just to win the Italian Grand Prix, just to save face kind of thing. But I think he's better than these guys. But I don't think he's as good as Giovinazzi. Why is Fagioli down here? I swear I put him like further up. I think I did. I put him above, kind of there. See, I don't have Norris hate. I just think that he should be doing a lot better with the machinery he's got and whatever. Because it's all good. It's all good winning Monaco and winning Austria and doing good performances. But he's doing good performances in 1 in every 3, maybe 1 in every 2 races. That's not good enough. When you're in a championship winning car, you have to be able to perform week in, week out. And Piastri can do that mostly. Like, don't get me wrong, he's had his moments where he makes mistakes, but it's like 20% of the time. And that's passable as a champion. We saw with Hamilton in his prime. He was good probably 80% of the time, maybe 90% of the time. That was good enough to be a champion. But with Norris, it's just not there. Piero Taruffi, 1952 Swiss Grand Prix, another very obscure winner. He made a book, I think, and he was also an engineer. There are 4 or 5 drivers on the current grid who would be dominating every race in that McLaren. Yeah, Verstappen, Russell, Leclerc, maybe not dominating every race, but dominating most races. Leclerc would be. Let me think. 4 to 5. Who's the 4th and 5th? I think other drivers that would do well in that machinery, Gasly, would be probably one of the next best drivers. Because I'm looking for consistent drivers as well. Taruffi, let's have a look. I think he's probably just kind of one of those. He was there and thereabouts, but he wasn't overly special. Kind of like Ina's Island. Kind of. Hold on, what am I doing? I'm being a div. Give us a sec. Trulli, here we go. Ciaron Trulli, fantastic qualifier. If we're talking about qualifiers, you could arguably make a case that he's a better qualifier than anyone here. But he wasn't the best racer, and long career, 1997 until 2011. You cannot deny that, and I think that does put him like it can go up into this kind of Massa tier. But I think he does kind of go at the bottom of it. I don't think he is as good as. No, actually, I do think he's as good as Massa because he was less inconsistent. But that's it. That's the only reason because of his longevity and his consistency. Taruffi goes to there. Schumacher goes to there. Hulkenberg 2. I think Hulkenberg could win a championship in that car, but I don't think he'd dominate. I think he could. I think he'd stack up well against Piastri, but I don't think he'd dominate. Tarufi is important in that his manual on race driving is still the definitive text. I'll have to take a look at that. Also, Bassett saying Max, Lewis, George, Charles. Bro's stinking Lewis in there like he hasn't been performing awfully since 2024. Remember, many people keep saying Yuki is doing well at Racing Bulls. How dare Red Bull not promote him at Red Bull? Look what happened. Yeah, anyone in that second seat is going to do awful. Trulli above Massa is crazy, not going to lie. No, I don't think it is, because Massa was inconsistent. And Trulli, I mean, yes, he had his inconsistent moments, but I think I'd definitely take Trulli to win a title over Massa in 2008 Ferrari, for example. Hakkinen is next. Here we go. We're getting into some properly decent drivers now. Not that all these drivers weren't good, but we're getting into proper bona fide champions now. Hakkinen, obviously, we have to take into the fact that he went up against Prime Schumacher, and he wasn't perfect. Like, he won 1998 because he was in a better car, and he won 1999 because Schumacher wasn't there. 2000 was the only properly like equal fight they had, and he just about lost out. But he was still a fantastic driver, and I think that he has to go easily into the top three. Better than Ascari. You see, Graham Hill had 17 years. Danny said Damon Hill. Mika Hakkinen only had 8.5. That's the problem I have with putting him above Hill. I think that's fair. I think I'll put him above Ascari, but not Hill. This is a problem because I do include longevity and consistency. I think that Hakkinen was definitely consistent, but he didn't have 17 years of consistency. And yeah, Hamilton, the luckiest and luckiest world champion ever. Yeah, he kind of is, because he was lucky in 1999, but he was also a bit unlucky, I suppose, in 2000. Maybe you could argue. If he'd had a slightly better car, he would have been able to be champion probably. Verstappen, I think, instantly goes to the top though. Don't get me wrong, he has his problems with racecraft, and I will be the first person to point those out. But so many champions throughout history, it's basically become a prerequisite of any multiple-time champion or generational talent since Prost and Senna to have problems with racecraft and being able to drive in a straight line or not drive into people. Kimi Räikkönen, I think, obviously, we're talking about longevity. He's got the most starts in F1 history. No, he doesn't. Alonso does now, but he did have the most starts. He, in his prime, he was untouchable. One of the fastest drivers in Formula 1 history. But the problem was, I think 2000. If you want to talk his career from 2001 until 2009, just that career alone was fantastic. But his return, 2012 was good. 2013 was decent. 2014 was awful. 2015 was not great. 2016 was okay. 2017 was okay. 2018 was better. 2019 was better. 2020 was good. And 2021 was also a bit good. So this is the issue with Raikkonen. Because, yes, in his prime he was fantastic. If you're talking about just prime Raikkonen without any sort of longevity or consistency, he goes second on this list easily. Maybe first. But his career averages bring him down. Kind of similar to Graham Hill, I suppose. Which is actually what I might... Do I put Hakkinen above... No, I'm not going to put Hakkinen above Hill. I think that Raikkonen can go above... Can he go above Hill? No, I might be slightly overrating Graham Hill a bit here. I might bring him below both of those two. And what I might do is, yeah, I'll keep Raikkonen above Hakkinen. Kimi is a bit like Mika, great but a short period, and also the fact he had a lot of clutter after his great years. He was a great development driver, and I think he is misunderstood. People think that he was just like lazy, or that he didn't care after his Ferrari, or after his second McLaren stint, or sorry, not his second Ferrari stint, or that he didn't care during his second Ferrari stint, which is stupid because he obviously did. He was a great development driver for that team, but he just clearly didn't have the same kind of drive to want to go for championships. Or yeah, he clearly had accomplished what he wanted to accomplish and didn't mind backing off. Kimi Räikkönen Hall of Fame now, maybe top 15. We'll see when we get to the end of the video. Damon Hill is so overrated. I'm sorry, Damon Hill is Luckily, the people who aren't Drive to Survive fans kind of see that he was kind of pulled along by his good cars. He had 1993, 1994, 1995, 1996, all in the best car. He should have been a 4-time champion. I mean, Prost was okay. If you want to take out the one with Prost as a teammate, 3-time champion. He was a 1-time champion because he couldn't capitalise in 1994 and 1995 when the gap between him and the second fastest car wasn't a billion years. Against all of his teammates, you look at his performances and they kind of stack up as you'd expect for kind of an average driver. He was, I suppose, better than Coulthard. He was worse than Mansell. He was just better than Villeneuve. He was better than Diniz. He was worse than Ralf Schumacher, and he was worse than Frentzen. That tells me all I need to know. He wasn't that good a driver. Damon Hill, I'd probably put him. I'll start at the top and then go down. He's not better than Verstappen. He's not better than Hakkinen, nor Hill, nor Ascari, nor Button, nor Peterson, nor Moss, nor Scheckter. He's not better than George Russell because George Russell would have absolutely cakewalked the title in that 1996 Williams. He's not better than Alan Jones. Not better than any of these guys. I'd even argue, based on longevity, not even better than Coulthard. Is he better than Villeneuve? I'm going to say no. And I'm also going to say no to James Hunt. I think Sainz would have won the title in 1996 Williams, as would Bottas. But I think when you get to Trulli is when you get to the drivers who he isn't better than. Luckily for him, Schumacher was inattractive for the 1996 season. Yes, if Schumacher, I think if Schumacher was even in that Benetton, I think he'd have won the title. That's an unpopular opinion. I think that could have been the case. Nelson Piquet. Now, obviously, when you talk about Piquet, you have to, as a person, you have to talk about his off-track conduct. But on track, he was fantastic. He's one of the only Brazilian or South American drivers in general who had a smooth driving style. Because all of them, like Senna, Barrichello, Massa, Fittipaldi, they all seem to be quite happy-go-lucky, quite aggressive. But Piquet was very much raced with his brain, and was very clever and was very smooth. He had a 12-13 year career, 3 championships. I know the last part of his career from 1987 San Marino onwards was basically just filler, him making money because he knew he was past it. But in his prime, he beat Alain Prost in 1983 on merit. He showed some fantastic performances against Prost in the 1986 and 87. Did well against. He was better than Mansell, way better than Mansell. People seem to think that Mansell deserved the 86 and 87 titles, not realising that Piquet was better in both seasons. I'd put him. I think do I put him ahead of Piquet? Hakkinen. I don't think so, because I don't think he had the raw, pure pace that Hakkinen did. But I think I can put him above those other guys. As we move these guys slowly down. I'm going to have to get the rest of the drivers done in 50 minutes. Nico Rosberg, he's quite overrated nowadays, especially with Drive to Survive fans who say, oh my god, he's like top 10 of all time, top 20 of all. I don't even think he's top 20 of all time. This is the thing, he had 11-year career. He had a really good prime. But the only reason he won 2016 was not because, yes, he was operating at 100% of his ability, but 100% of his ability was about 90% of what Hamilton's ability is. And it was only because Hamilton kept making mistakes throughout 2016 and kept getting pegged back by both his mistakes and by reliability that not in races but in qualifying and co, that Rosberg won that title. He's better than all these guys just purely for the fact he's won a championship. He's better than Bottas, better than Hunt, better than Villeneuve, better than Coulthard. But I think that if you put, for example, Gerhard Berger in those cars, I think that he might have won one championship against Lewis, because Lewis is just a bit error prone. Factor in Vettel beat Raikkonen 4 years when you get to... this is the thing, because like Vettel beating Raikkonen 4 years isn't really that impressive, because although, yes, it's Raikkonen and stuff like that, Raikkonen was clearly the number 2 driver. It's like saying Schumacher beat Barrichello in all 5 years or whatever it was. Fangio for me is the greatest driver of all time. Like you want the he's got everything. He's got the pure raw unadulterated speed of Verstappen, of Clark, of all those guys, Senna. He's got the qualifying pace of Senna. He's got the race pace of Prost. He's got the car management skills that Prost had. He's got the sportsmanship of just an average 1950s racing driver, where he didn't crash into people. He doesn't have any controversies on track. The 1955 Le Mans disaster that he was a mild part of, but apart from that, nothing. He dominated. Like the 1950s was just Fangio, and it took F1 about 5 years to recover and find its feet again after he retired. He was the best when he retired, and people say, oh, he was only racing against princes and old people. He was the old people. Like, yes, at the start of F1, there are a lot of 40 and 50-year-olds. But by the time 1955, 1956 had come along, Mike Hawthorne, Peter Collins, Sterling Moss, they were in their 20s. So Fangio was definitely like of his own generation and was the best of his generation. He had the consistency, bulletproof consistency. Like in his entire career, I think he had about 2 bad races. 1956 Monaco, when he kept hitting oil drums, I believe, on the side of a track, and still finished second, I believe. And I think it was Silverstone where he was driving the unpredictable. In 1954, when he was driving the unpredictable, what's it called? Wheel covered car. Not the open wheel, of a closed wheeled Mercedes, the Streamliner, at Silverstone, and he finished like 4th. He never finished outside the top 4. He has the highest win percentage in F1 history. He has the highest front row percentage in F1 history, the highest pole percentage, I believe, in F1 history. He's fantastic. Then you go to Jim Clark. Okay, another great driver. I think Jim Clark is definitely better than Verstappen. The only things that really go against Clark, against Fangio for me, for example, are Clark was, I think, faster than Fangio on pure pace. But and he was good at saving his machinery, and he was good at a lot of other things. But it took him 2 years to get going. It took 1960 and 1961. He wasn't better than guys like Ines Ireland and Cliff Allison and people like that. It took him a couple of years to get going. Fangio didn't need that, and I know he was already a race car driver and stuff. But this is F1 we're talking about, not all the other series. Lauda is a very good driver. You see, with the constant, Verstappen keeps pushing the limits of what you think someone is capable of doing in a car. I think in my previous top 10 I had Lauda 5th, but I'm actually going to bring him. He was ahead of Verstappen. I think he's going to go behind Verstappen now, because I think Verstappen is in his prime and he's truly destroying the field. Lauda, a fantastic driver, super consistent. Never really had an off year. I mean, he had 1982 and 1983 and I suppose 1985, but in his prime he was fantastic and dominant. 1975 through to 1978 proved that. I think that's all I really need to say. Next up is Jackie Stewart, another good driver. Nice and smooth and got the job done. I think he's ahead of Raikkonen, behind Lauda. Let me just, I keep having to drag everyone down. Elio De Angelis. We've gone away from the champions a bit now, but a great driver. 1979 until 1986. Obviously died before he could reach his full potential. He was better than Mansell at Lotus, although Mansell was unfairly treated. He was stacked up to Senna pretty well, even though he was unfairly treated against Senna. And overall, he was a good driver. I think he was a future champion. better than these guys. But I think he goes up to kind of this level. I think he is probably slightly better than Massa just because Massa was a bit inconsistent. I know he doesn't have the same longevity, but I'm willing to make an exception for DeAngelis, especially because he didn't have a choice in his lack of consistency, I suppose. Patrick Depailler, 2 race wins. I've heard good things about him. He was a fantastic driver, but I don't really hear much other than just that. Oh, he was a bit better than people think he is. So I suppose I'll put him around about here, around about where Bandini and Ocon are. Yeah, I'm having to bomb through these quite quickly. Gonzalez, Fangio, one of Fangio's best mates, 2-time race winner, first Ferrari race winner. He could actually match Fangio and Ascari on his day for pace, but he just wasn't that consistent. He was a bit fat as well, I suppose. I'll probably put him around about the Norris kind of thing. Not bad, but not the greatest either. Jean-Pierre Jabouille, right? He is such an interesting driver. Jean-Pierre Jabouille has 49 race starts in his Formula 1 career. He has 3 finishes and 2 race wins. And the only car he ever drove was the experimental turbo Renaults, and that just proves how unreliable they were. They were fast, but they were unreliable. So Jean-Pierre Jabouille, I think he was more of an engineer than a driver, and I think if you put someone like a René Arnoux or another French driver, Depailler, for example, in that of that time, I think that he would have done just as good a job, if not better. But I think Jabouille is just kind of a nothing burger of a driver because, yeah, he was just there because he was an engineer and he knew how to develop these cars. So I'll probably put him around the Musso, the Pache region. Leclerc, championship potential driver. I think if he was put in that 2025 McLaren, he'd be a lot better than he was, for example, in 2022 against Verstappen, because I think he tried a lot too hard in 2022. He's definitely above guys like Sainz. I think he's a better driver than Hunt on consistency. I think he's better than Villeneuve. I think he's better than Coulthard. Do I think he's better than Rosberg? See, prime Rosberg was very consistent, but I think Leclerc was slightly faster. Same with Berger, same with Andretti. I think he's slightly better than Fittipaldi. I think when you get to guys like Reutemann is when I'd start to stutter and start not putting him ahead. We're getting closer to actually getting drivers, not even having drivers in completely. So we've got Perez, who was basically Red Bull. His Red Bull career has gutted his reputation, but he still had a very good career before that. He's better than Norris. He's better than Alesi. He's better than Panis. He's better than Ocon. He's better than Bandini on longevity. He's better than. Actually, I wouldn't put him above Depailler. I think I'd probably put him around there. Actually, no, I'm going to bring him up. That's wrong of me. I'm going to bring him up to just above. Maybe about there. Yeah, that's fair. Peter Revson, another driver gone too soon. Did about 3 years in Formula 1 and won with McLaren, I believe. I think wasn't one of his race wins the scoring error at the 1973 Canadian Grand Prix. I think it might have been. Or was that the United States Grand Prix? I don't even remember. But he was a decent enough driver, I suppose. Kind of perfectly synonymous to Depailler, I suppose. Yep. So now we have Ricardo Rodriguez. We have Pedro Rodriguez, two-time winner, again, another two-time winner, won 1970 Spa, won 1967 South Africa, just kind of a nothing burger, decent enough driver who is fantastic in the wet weather. So I'll probably put him around about where Gonzalez is. Yeah, a nothing burger really of a driver. I love saying that word, or that phrase, should I say. Josie Fair, another driver who went too soon. 7-year Formula 1 career, roughly. Another, I think I would just put him kind of around this kind of Depailler, Revson, maybe slightly better than Depailler. Yeah, I'm having to rush through this because I've realised just how long I spent earlier waffling about other drivers that I didn't need to waffle about. Patrick Tombe. I guess he's a decent enough driver. He should have won a championship in the 1983 Ferrari, which is why I probably won't put him as high as some of the other guys, but he was still a decent enough driver, probably ahead of Jaboy, but behind Pache. Maurice Trintignant, Monaco specialist, won 2 times around there. I don't think he even got another podium. No, he might have got a couple of podiums in the Gordinis in the early 50s, but he was more of a longevity kind of guy. He raced from 1950 until 1964, I think. He had a lot of longevity. But overall, I think he might have just been a bit of a Monaco specialist, which is why I'd put him kind of lower down the rankings, even though he is a 2-time race winner. Not the best. Better than Kovalainen, but not as good as Musso. Wolfgang von Trips, one of the worst drivers to actually compete for a title, in my opinion. Him and Phil Hill were kind of just lucky to be in that car. Obviously died at the second to last round in Monza. Not the best of drivers, so I'll put him kind of around where Ginther is. Maybe slightly worse than Ginther. Then we've got Nigel Mansell. Okay, a couple more champions here. Nigel Mansell. I see a lot of people saying like, "Oh my God, our Nigel was so determined and he deserved so many more titles," but he didn't. 1986, he was worse than Piquet and Prost, because Prost had the best season in F1 history, in my opinion. 1987, he caused his own crash at Suzuka that gave him the concussion. And yeah, he pushed too hard. He was too inconsistent. Like he wore his arm on his sleeve way too much. And that's what caused Nigel Mansell to not be as good as he could have been. I'd say that, like, if we look at these other drivers, like, he's not as good as Peterson. He's not as good as... he might be as good as Moss, but I wouldn't say so. I think that obviously his career has lasted longer than George Russell, but I think as an actual driver, I don't think he's as good. I think he's fast, but he's not consistent enough. I'd go below. I'd go below Alan Jones, and then I'd stop trying to be mean to him. I'll actually put Leclerc up to ahead of Reutemann as well. Why not? Alonso, obviously loads of longevity, buckets of longevity, but the problem is he does burn bridges and he has proved himself to be a bit mistake prone at times. I meant to say if I said he wears his arm on his sleeve, I meant to say his heart on his sleeve. Whoops. But I think Alonso's better than Hill, but I wouldn't put him any higher than that. I'd probably demote Ascari out of the top 10, therefore. It was going to happen eventually. Next is Thierry Boutsen, a boring driver by most people's assumptions, but by not the most horrendous by any stretch. I'd probably put him around about the Ocon Panis level. That's actually kind of perfect. I'd say he's probably better than Alesi, maybe not. Better than Norris. I'd count on Norris in a title battle because Boutsen in himself was kind of inconsistent. He had his great moments, like Hungary '89, I think it was, and another race in 1990. I can't exactly remember, but yeah. That's the thing with Mansell. He was just too inconsistent. Like, he was nowhere at Lotus. I know he was unfairly treated by Peter War, but he was very loud down there at Lotus. He wasn't much better than Keke Rosberg. He wasn't better than Nelson Piquet. I suppose he was better than Boutsen and Patrese in those kind of intervening Williams years, but he lost the title in 1991 because he was too error prone, and because I suppose Williams wasn't doing well. But he also got dunked on by Prost in 1990, and yeah, the only time he ever did anything was when he had a dominant car. That's the only time he ever did anything. Maldonado above Norris is diabolical. No, it isn't, because Maldonado had the bottles to be able to actually win in a car when not even when the car was fastest. Even when the car wasn't fastest, Maldonado could win, whereas Norris can't do that. Peter Collins. See, some people say, oh, he should have been a 1956 champion because Fangio handed his car over, but actually, it would have actually evened the balance. It would actually even balance because Collins had one less mechanical retirement than Fangio did that year, so he would have actually had it a bit more balanced than it would have otherwise been. I think he was a good driver, potential future champion, but didn't ever get to prove it. I'd say he was kind of around this sort of area. Maybe around the kind of Gasly Maldonado region. Fisichella, a great midfield driver, but not really cut out for top level machinery. I'd probably put him, around about this Ocon Panis. Probably slightly better than those two. Probably around maybe there. Frentzen. Who said 161 to 55? Was that? Oh, that's in referring to Alonso versus Raikkonen. Raikkonen didn't like that car, and Alonso's known for overdriving awful cars. The thing is, Alonso, as much as he has great seasons like 2012, 2014, 2006, as much as he has those fantastic seasons, he has kind of dud or seasons where he's inconsistent. 2008, 2007, 2009. And there are years where he's just not there. Like, as much as he's a good driver and as much as he can perform in those midfield machinery, he should be performing in top machinery, but he burns bridges. He's not been spectacular this year. I can't put him over PK and guys like that, because PK and stuff have matched guys like Prost. They've beaten guys like Mansell. They've beaten guys like Senna. Whereas Alonso, as much as I like to rib Hamilton, he equaled Hamilton. He he hasn't got that same thing. That actually, why is Raikkonen there? Hold on, why is Raikkonen that high? Give me a second. I would probably give me a second, because he should not be ahead of Hakkinen and co. I think it's because of longevity that I initially put him there, but I just kind of forgot he was there. I probably would switch those two. That's why people are saying 16155. That makes sense. Frentzen, a decent midfield driver again, just like Fisichella, but could not hack it at a top team. Williams 97. Where did I put Fisichella? I put him in that same kind of region. Maybe slightly better than Depailler. Hawthorne wasn't the best of champions. I'd say he was just kind of similar to Hawthorne was similar to Collins, similar to those other guys, Brooks. It's just that he so happened to be in the Ferrari in 1958 and survived the entire season. I'd probably put him. I wouldn't even consider him as good as guys like Collins. As actually, would I? Was he just consistent, and that's why I'm being mean to him, because I usually don't like those consistent drivers who can't like win every time. Maybe I'll put him. I'll put him just below Collins, actually. So I'll actually put him on this part of it. Johnny Herbert looked into 3 wins. All of his 3 wins were due to either crazy racers or due to other people crashing out, namely Damon Hill into Michael Schumacher. And overall, don't get me wrong, he had his good moments, but I don't think he was really cut out for anything. I know his accident and stuff in his junior career, but still, I don't think he was that special of a driver. Also a terrible pundit. So, yeah, I think he was probably worse than Stroll, worse than Nannini and Beltoise. That's about where I'd put him. Maybe put Albon above Geffen. Phil Hill, the worst champion. I just need to make sure he's below Hawthorne. I genuinely think he was kind of a nothing driver akin to like a Tombe. It's just that he was lucky that instead of like Tombe was in a car that wouldn't have constructors but wasn't dominant, Hill was in a car that was dominant. So I'd probably put him like that. Didier Pironi probably did deserve a title had he survived 1982, or not survived, but had got to the end of 1982, and really was quite an underrated driver, be it better than Villeneuve. I'm sorry, I know Villeneuve was better in 1981 when the car was awful, but when the car was good in 1982, Pironi was better. Pironi better than these guys. I put him kind of in the same block as Hunt, kind of drivers who weren't really around for long. I know, again, it wasn't his fault that he wasn't around for long, but and then you do that. Actually, what have I done there? Hold on, give me a second. There we go. Senna. Right, here we go. This is going to be controversial. So Senna goes there. He goes below Lauda, above Stewart. Senna's just too inconsistent. Like, for every good season he had a couple of seasons where he lost to Prost, for example, or he was in general just a bit inconsistent. Like, literally, 1988 Monaco is the perfect like summary of Senna's entire career, because if you look at it, fantastic qualifier, absolutely amazing qualifier, especially in Monaco, 1.4 seconds quicker than his teammate, but he's too busy trying to put manners on Prost, so he crashes out. Like, he was a fast driver, but he wore his, again, just like Mansell, wore his heart on his sleeve far too often. And if he learned to park his ego, he would have been such a better driver. He would have been able to be Prost. He would have been able to... You can't see the top row, sorry. He would have been Prost. He would have been what Prost was. Off topic, who would you put in the Cadillac seats for next year, and who do you think would be the best choice for the seats? I'm going to go for a boring option. I'm going to say Bottas and Perez. Not only because they are two drivers, one will bring loads of sponsorship and they will both bring realms of experience, but because it will finally settle the debate about 2021 and about which car was faster between the Red Bull and Mercedes. I don't actually know which one was fastest. I think that they were both pretty equal. But it would finally settle the debate as to which one was fastest. Dan Gurney, best driver never to win a championship. This is the actual best driver never to win a championship. So where's Moss? Moss is there. Peterson's there. I think he was, I think he can go. I don't think he was better than Button. He can just kind of go there, I suppose. I just need to hope that the rest of these guys are stinkers because I've only got 20 minutes until I have to go. I should have definitely stopped waffling. I think that's what I've realised here. Eddie Irvine. Good driver, could never hack it at a top team. Yeah, good driver could never hack it at a top team. I think I'll kind of put him in this kind of Bootsin kind of thing because, he had his good moments, but he was a bit crash prone, a bit error prone, and couldn't win a 1999 title, even though he was in the better car. McLaren, Bruce McLaren, shares a birthday with me. I think he wasn't a championship level driver because he had the opportunity in 1959, didn't take it. But I think that he could have done something more, I suppose, had he not died. I think that he's probably around about the Revson, kind of Fisichella level, maybe slightly above Fisichella. Next up is Prost. Right, this is gonna piss a lot of people off. Prost is the second greatest driver of all time. He has arguably, as I maybe only behind Fangio, the most consistency of all time in Formula One. You look at the teammates he's gone up against. He beat John Watson in 1980 as a rookie. He thrashed Arnoux 3 years in a row. Not 3 years in a row, 2 years in a row. Thrashed Eddie Cheever. He loses to Lauda by half a point. He was the worst driver. Lauda was much better in the races. Not much better, slightly better in the races. Also, in 1983, he lost the title to Piquet. It was by a small margin, but he was still a very good driver. Piquet was a very good driver as well, you got to remember. Prost was the best driver in 1985. No one got near him. Same in 1986, except he was in the second fastest car rather than the fastest car. 1987, he just couldn't bring that thing to great results. Well, he could, but he just couldn't do it consistently. 1988, he was better than Senna. In the races both drivers finished, he was on average 8 seconds ahead. 1989, Senna was on average 1 second ahead in the races they both finished without issue. And I believe that title could have gone either way. But also Senna, again, made too many mistakes. As much as, yes, he made the mistake and or Prost crashed into him deliberately in Suzuka, he could have easily not crashed in Adelaide, and then it would have been an even harder conversation to have as to whether Senna deserved that 1989 championship. 1990, the Ferrari was worse than the McLaren, yet he still took it to a title decider and probably would have and could have won it. 1991, he thrashes John Lacey. 1992, takes a sabbatical. And 1993 is actually his worst season, even though he won the title, because Hill was too close to him at some points, and he was making mistakes. Oh yeah, also Keke Rosberg. I forgot about him. I always forget that Keke Rosberg was his teammate in 1986. But yeah, he's just such a fantastic driver. Definitely better than Senna, because the Senna family pays so much money to so many news outlets and to Formula One in general to put this idea out that Prost is a villain and that Senna was some mythical creature when he wasn't. He was just a racing driver. Vettel, this is the problem with, again, Vettel, fantastic peak. Had he retired in 2013, or at the end of 2013, he would have been up in the top 10. But he didn't, so he's not. I think that he had a lot of filler years. He still had good years after 2013, 2015, 2017 was a good year for him. But he was just too inconsistent. He had too many okay or good seasons to really be considered up with the other guys. And that's why I put him. So far he's 13th. He will probably fall down a bit further, but he's so far 13th. He's not as good as guys like... I know Raikkonen, for example, had a couple of those, but he did still prove that he was up there. And I think Raikkonen's peak was better than Vettel's, because although it wasn't as fruitful in terms of wins and championships, it was clear that Vettel had dominant cars. Raikkonen didn't. And also, he has less longevity than Raikkonen. Raikkonen has what? 18 seasons. Vettel has 15. Or 14 and a half, even 15. Alboreto, a decent driver actually. Alboreto is kind of not really known. I mean, I say Prost was way better than everyone in 1985. Alboreto was the only driver who really came close. Maybe Senna as well, actually, to be fair. But Alboreto could have won that title if Ferrari had not blown up a lot in the last 5 races. He was definitely a good driver, just kind of not really on the same level as guys like Senna, Prost. But then again, not many are. So I'd probably put him kind of around this DeAngelis, Trulli level. I'd even put him better than Damon Hill, because I just think he is. And it's my list. I decide. Giuseppe Farina, the first F1 world champion. He wasn't a deserving champion over Fangio that year, unfortunately. But still, he could beat him on certain days, which kind of puts him above guys like Hawthorne, I suppose. No, actually, I don't think it does. I think that he was kind of... I think the tough thing is, I think he was kind of a very good driver that got lucky that Fangio got one more retirement than he did. So I'll probably put him about there. Hold on, I need to... Where did I put... Hold on, I need to do that. And then put... Yeah, there we go. Clay Regazzoni, fantastic little driver. Quite a good peddler. He's kind of... He'll be in the same place as Ray Uterman. Wherever Ray Uterman is, I'll put him in the same sort of window. I'd say he was probably slightly... Yeah, basically just there. They're both kind of together as peas in the pod kind of situation there. I've realised I've got 15 minutes to do the rest of these drivers. Right. How many have I got? Luckily, a lot of these are going to be outside of the top 100, hopefully when I get to them. So, Keke Rosberg, super underrated driver. Although he only had, 8 seasons in the sport, he did a lot in those seasons. Was in the back marker teams for 3 of them. Won a championship against a lot of very good drivers. 1983 was thrashing Jacques Lafitte. 1984 was... Was Jacques Lafitte's teammate in 1983? I might have got that wrong. No, I don't think I did. 1984, I think he was also Jacques Lafitte as his teammate. 85, he goes up against Mansell and does really well. Gets that 160 mile an hour lap in Silverstone. And then in 1986, he's plagued by reliability. He's better than all these guys. Don't get me wrong. He's better than these, better than these, better than these, better than Peterson, better than Gurney, better than Button. I'd even argue better than Brabham. Better than Ascari. Yes. I think on pure pace he's better than Vettel. I think on pure pace and on consistency he is, but on longevity he doesn't have the longevity, unfortunately. So Berger down to there. Trulli down to there. John Watson is next. Watson, so yeah, Watson. I think John Watson was one of those guys. There were a lot of guys in the late 70s to early 80s who were very good, but not quite championship level, and he was one of them. I'll probably put him around about here. I think he was better than Ferrari. I think he was probably around about the kind of severe level. Maldonado down there, then to Panis, then to Jabboy, then to Albon, then to Mass. Tony Brooks. Where's Collins and Hawthorne? Because he's going about the same place that they are. I'll probably put him ahead of Hawthorne. I know. Now, were they teammates when he won the title? I think they were. So actually, I'll bring him down here. Lafitte. Again, he was just like Watson. One of those late 70s, early 80s decent drivers. He also had quite a lot of longevity. He started in 1974 and ended in 1986, but he retired at like 43. So he had quite a long career. So Lafitte, I think, has to go around. And he also had 6 wins. He's the second. I think he's got the second most wins of any French driver, which does prove just how good Prost is, first of all, and second of all, I'll probably put him above Massa, but behind DeAngelis. Riccardo Patrese, another good kind of number 2. We've had a couple of those today. I'd probably put him about where Perez is, because he was about the same thing. We've now done 100 drivers. However, I need to do a lot more. How many of them is there? I think there's about 12 in a row. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 14, 42, 84. I'm not going to get this done, am I? 120 something. I've got about 120 drivers to do in 10 minutes. Hopefully a lot of these are going to fall out of the out of the way, so I don't have to worry about them. Right, so Rindt goes into here. I'd probably put him. See, the only thing is he only had about 5 seasons in the top, so I'd probably put him ahead of Brabham. But guys like, and Ascari, I suppose, because he had no longevity either. But that's about it. Right, Moss down to there. Andretti. I'm not going to get this done, I don't think. I think I've mistimed everything. But what I'll do is I'll have a provisional list, and then maybe I'll pick this back up tomorrow or something. And finally, we've got a driver dropping out of the top 100. Mazepin. Ralf Schumacher. A bit fruity, but he is quick. I'll put him above Schumacher. Sorry, above Perez, above Massa, above Lafitte, above DeAngelis, above Trulli, even above Hill. I'll put him above Hill. And Latifi goes in here too. Surtees. Surtees, 1964 champion, more of a development driver than he was actually like a super fast legend. But I'd still put him quite highly in this ranking. Not as good as Fittipaldi, but better than better than Andretti. Yeah, I may have to do a part 2 of this, so I'll probably just pick this up, and I won't leave right now. Don't worry. I can still stay and do a couple of questions, I suppose. But what I think I'll do is I'll do Hamilton, because I can then talk a bit about him. And then I might quickly go through and see if in my rushing I've put any drivers in the wrong place. Because that could easily be possible. Lewis Hamilton. Right, let's see what drivers we have currently on the list, because I'm not sure I have all of the drivers that I usually have in my lists like this just yet. So, he's not as good as Fangio. He's not as good as Prost. He's not as good as Jim Clark. He's not as good as Max Verstappen. He's not as good as Niki Lauda. He's not as good as Senna. He's not as good as Stewart. He is better than Hakkinen. Is he better? See, Hakkinen's prime is better than Hamilton's prime. But Hamilton's consistency, longevity is better. That's the only thing that's keeping him there, I think. So what I'll do is I will do this. So Hamilton at the moment is sitting in 8th, but Schumacher's still to come, and I think we've got another few drivers still to come. So I'll quickly run through the drivers that we've done at the moment, and then I will pick this up at a different point. Probably tomorrow I'll announce a stream. I've got a league race tonight, so I can't do it tonight, unfortunately. Otherwise, I would have done. I'm trying to think of other stuff. I've got gym. The reason why I'm leaving is because I've got a gym appointment in 40-50 minutes. So let me just see. Fangio, Prost, Clark, yes. Verstappen, Lauda, Senna, yes. Stewart, Hamilton, yes. Hakkinen, Piquet. At the moment, I'm happy with this. Alonso, Raikkonen, yes. Hill, okay, yep. Vettel, Rosberg, Rindt, Ascari, Brabham, Button, Gurney, Peterson, Moss, Scheckter, Russell, Jones. He's actually going pretty well. Barrichello, Leclerc, Reutemann, Regazzoni, Fittipaldi, Surtees, Alesi, Berger. I put maybe Berger ahead of Andretti, because I think Andretti didn't have the longevity. Rosberg, Coulthard, Villeneuve, Pironi, Hunt, Sainz, Bottas, Alboreto. Actually, no, Alboreto can go ahead of Bottas. Ralf Schumacher can also go ahead of Bottas. Devon Hill can stay right there. Trulli, De Angelis. No, he's not. De Angelis was better, okay. Lafitte was also better. I think I might have overrated Trulli slightly here. But he's ahead of Massa. Perez was better than Massa. Patrese was better than... Was he better? No, he wasn't better than... No, he wasn't. Watson can go ahead of Patrese, I suppose. Sever, Kubica, Gasly, Collins, Horvath, Brooks, Maldonado. Let me think if I can put Maldonado any higher. I think... See, this is the problem. I'd have to put him above Hawthorne. I don't think he's better than Hawthorne. I can probably put him ahead of Brooks. I can do that. But then again, I think Gasly has been very consistent throughout his career, so I think he can stay there. Farina there. Soufer can go slightly up, because I think Soufer is quite underrated. Frentzen, yep. Depailler, McLaren, Fisichella, Revson, Bandini, Ocon, Panis, Alesi, Norris, Boutsen, Irvine, Rodriguez. Yeah, I think that's mostly fair. Kiefer has been saying in the chat Maldonado over Gasly this entire time, but the problem is, as much as I love Maldonado, he had a 5-year career. Gasly has been performing consistently at maybe Maldonado's 2015 level for his entire career. That's the problem, because Gasly is bulletproof consistent. That's the problem. I would love to put Maldonado higher, but I can't. I physically can't. He's already the highest one-time race winner. No, he isn't actually. Why is Severe there? Now he's the highest one-time race winner, I believe. And that's about as far as I can take him. Hamilton longevity for sure brings him up there, even if I think Mercedes blows his stats quite a bit. But Mika at his peak is not long enough to be a peak in front of us. Yeah, Hakkinen isn't in front of Hamilton, but Hamilton. I will quickly run through Hamilton's career, then I'll have to go. So Hamilton, let's look through his career. So 2007, he comes into McLaren. He's up against Fernando Alonso, and the points say he's equal to Alonso as a rookie, which sounds amazing, until you factor in the fact that basically Formula One had, and I know a lot of people already know this, but Formula One had just been in a tyre war, Bridgestone, Michelin. 2007, the FIA says you have to have Bridgestone tyres. And Alonso has been racing on Michelins for the last 5 years. Hamilton has been racing on Bridgestones in GP2 the last season. And I know people might, especially Drive to Survive fans, they'll probably say, oh, well, it's just tyres. It doesn't matter. It's not actually making a difference. It does, because the construction of the tyres affects how you drive. And Alonso drove very aggressively on the Michelins because that's how they needed you to drive them. And Bridgestones needed to be driven more smoothly, so Hamilton had been driving smoothly throughout his entire junior career to get used to those tyres. And so it took Alonso and Raikkonen, who are the two main title protagonists other than Hamilton, half a year to get used to those tyres. Not only that, but McLaren were favouring Lewis Hamilton. Hungary proves that. People talk about Alonso holding Hamilton up in the pit lane. What they don't talk about is the fact that Hamilton refused to go team orders, where there was a gentleman's agreement between the two drivers. I give you the tow one race weekend, you give me the tow next race weekend. Hamilton ignored this and forced Alonso to give him the tow, and Alonso held him up in the pit lane. The FIA weren't initially going to give a penalty because it was an inter-team matter and it was kind of a political thing. But Ron Dennis went up to the FIA and said, I want Alonso penalised. And so they penalised him. That is the most favouritism you can ever think of. And Hamilton, don't get me wrong, he had China and he had Brazil. China was his own fault, but Brazil, I suppose, wasn't. But Alonso had a couple of mechanical issues throughout the season, and he was overall the faster driver. 2008, Hamilton pretty much bottles his way to a title because Massa bottled more. 2009, first half of the season, Kovalainen was better than Lewis. He was faster in qualifying, and he was in the races they finished. There wasn't many races they finished together, but when they did, Kovalainen was slightly better. When the car got better, fair enough, Hamilton was clear. 2010, he was slightly clear of Button by about 5 seconds in the races. 2011, he was 15 seconds behind on average in the races because he was too busy crashing into other drivers. 2012, he was actually one of his better seasons and he was way better than Button. 2013, he was worse than Rosberg. Yep, that's my alarm, but I'll quickly carry on. 2015, it was his best season. 2016 was a good season for him, but Rosberg was slightly better. 2017 through to 2020, he had no competition from his teammate and the drivers and team combination he was going up against. Vettel and Ferrari was temperamental at best and chaotic at worst. 2019 and 2020 were proof that he was just in the best car, and his problems as a driver were being masked by the fact that he was in the best car. He showed the same kind of lack of awareness and racecraft that he did in 2021 that he did in 2019 and 20. It's just that, again, he was in the faster car, so he didn't see it as much. 2021, he gets beaten by Verstappen on equal terms. 2022, he gets beaten by Russell on equal terms. 2023, I suppose he had some sort of a renaissance, but it wasn't enough. And 2024, he was awful in qualifying, and in the races, didn't really recover enough. People accused the team of sabotage when it was just Russell's outperforming him, so therefore it can't be real when it could be. And 2025 has been awful. You don't finish 20 seconds behind your teammate. I know Leclerc's a good driver, but if you're a 7-time champion, you don't finish that low. You don't. People always underrate how good Mika was in his 1993-6 before McLaren improved in 97. He was good. He was solid, but that was the same with Alonso. Pretty much every season of his career in 2011, Vettel is better than most of his top drivers' best seasons. Alonso and Hamilton was a complicated one. They tied in 07, but it was turbulent. Alonso was stronger than Lewis in a lesser car between 2010 and 2013. Yeah, basically. The thing is, I know people are talking about Vettel. I'll quickly explain Vettel. Because, yes, his prime seasons are just as good as some of the best seasons in history. But his bad seasons, like you look at 2014, it's just nothing. 2016 is just nothing. 2017 is great, but then 2018 is bottle job central. 2019 was good in points, but also bottle job central. 2020 was awful. 2021 was average. 2022 was average. Like, you can't just ignore the bad and go all the good. And I think that's perfect because, for example, Graham Hill, who is just got in front of him, has a lot of that, a lot of good and a bit of mid. And he's ahead of a lot of other drivers. You can't just say Vettel better peaks, therefore Vettel needs to go ahead of Alonso, because Alonso, even at his worst, we're talking like 2007, 2008, 2009, was winning races and finishing on the podiums in either cars that shouldn't have been able to do that or in circumstances that were against him. And with Raikkonen and co, Raikkonen is ahead of Vettel as well. With Raikkonen, it's that his prime was better than Vettel's, and that yes, his peak was his lower points were also not great, but like I'd say his worst season was probably 2014. Aside from that, you're talking like 2015, 2016. He was just kind of where Vettel was in 2022, 2021, 2020. Those kind of average seasons. There's nothingness. And that's what I'm getting at. I will end this stream now. I hope everyone's had a great time. I will be more open to questions. I'm assuming the thing will be tomorrow, but I'll put out an announcement. You can message me on Instagram or Discord, or because I'm very active in Ciaron Smith's server. I assume a lot of you guys are probably in there anyway. So get in there. DRS Train server, I'll also be active. So message me on Instagram or wherever if I've not done it. If I'm not put out any announcements, but I should be getting it all sorted soon. We'll pick this ranking back up, and it'll mean that I can go through a lot more drivers a lot more concisely, and we can do it a lot smoother and with a lot less rushing. But yeah, thank you for tuning in. 17 people, 14 people, fantastic amounts of people. I appreciate everyone who's turned up. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Hold on, I'm Nedzo, and I will see you all later. Bye.